Not as tall as the other presenters. Welcome. Let us pray. Creative and creating God, as we made our way here today, we could not help but be awed by your creation. The glowing sun that made the changing colors even more brilliant and highlighted the myriad of colors within colors. The dawn of each new day has the potential for new possibilities we have not yet imagined, filling us with resurrection hope and calling us to proclaim, you are with us, we are not alone. This is truly your day, O Lord, and may we rejoice and be glad in it. Compassionate and loving God, as we come for this second annual seminar, we give thanks for all that continues to evolve from the seeds that were planted last year. And in that spirit, we come expectantly, asking you to once again open our hearts and minds to the needs, the pain, the suffering in our midst. Do it again, Lord. In this time and in this space, push us beyond our comfort zones to new understandings that give birth to new ways of caring for one another. And for those who came searching for new ways of being and living through the uncharted waters that lie before them, may they discover here hope and peace that only you can give. We offer our gratitude for all who dreamed and planned and prepared for this time, and for our speakers who have come to share with us from their vast knowledge and experience. Be present at our table, Lord, as we share our meals and our lives with one another. And may this food nourish our bodies and strengthen us for service in your world. In the name of the living Christ, in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.
So now we're going to get started. I am really excited to be able to introduce Ms. Cheryl Blanchard. Cheryl is a licensed certified social worker. Clinical social worker, sorry. She is certified dementia care specialist and certified case manager. She has worked with seniors throughout Tennessee for several years in a variety of roles and has focused most of her training on caring for those with Alzheimer's disease for the last 10 years. She joined Alzheimer's Tennessee as the regional director for the Middle Tennessee area in 2021. Please help me welcome Ms. Cheryl Blanchard.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction. I'll tell you, I'm laughing at this being the microphone because I am a pacer by nature. I pace and I pace, and so I'm going to have to try to, gosh, thank you, you're my hero. I'm going to pace with this one, yay. So I move around a lot, but it is such a joy to be here. I am a Knoxville girl, and so when Gabe called me and asked me before she even finished the question, I said, come home? Absolutely, I'd love to come home and spend time with you all. So it is wonderful to be back. I was with Alzheimer's Tennessee in a different capacity, which is how Gabe and I first met. I was there as a program specialist, left and spent a lot of time, thank you, in the world of dialysis and kidney health. So I've worked with other type of chronic diseases as well. I worked in oncology for a little while as well. So lots of different kinds of chronic illnesses. But Alzheimer's is definitely my, because I pace, it's definitely my passion and what I have dedicated the last 11 or 12 years of my life working with. So super excited to be here. I moved over the plateau about 2 years ago to take over as regional director in Middle Tennessee. but Knoxville is and forever will always be home. So happy to be here with you. So we're going to talk about some of the caregiving decisions that families have to make. And as I said, my specialty is Alzheimer's disease, but I do have experience as a social worker in many, many different capacities and all kinds of different illnesses. So I tried to draw on that past experience as well to share with you. And I want to start off with a little giggle because we're going to be talking about some pretty heavy subjects today. So I was just wondering, has anybody ever heard what being a caregiver and Cleopatra have in common? No? They often both live in denial. All right? So we're going to start there. We're going to talk about denial. Why is denial so dangerous? And when I say denial, I don't mean completely saying nothing at all is wrong with mom or dad or grandma or whoever. But we find ourselves saying things like, oh, it's probably nothing. And in the world of Alzheimer's disease, well, Dad's always been a little forgetful, or, well, she's just, being a little bit more cantankerous. It's so easy to use that word just. Well, it's just. But, denial can be really dangerous. For one reason, it prevents you from getting a diagnosis. And one of the most important things, and you'll hear from an actual doctor in a minute that'll talk about maybe the importance of that diagnosis. I am not a doctor, but I can tell you, you can't do a thing until you have a diagnosis. And the thing of it with Alzheimer's disease in my world, it's so important to go and get that evaluated because there are about 87 different things that can cause a person to have the symptoms of dementia, and the majority of them are reversible. Wouldn't you want to go find out if you have a reversible cause? No, the big four we know about, Alzheimer's, FTD, Lewy body, and vascular, those are not. But there are so many things that can cause those symptoms. So let's go find out. And when we're in denial, oh, it's just, I've just always had the stitch in my side, it's nothing. What if it is? And the sooner you find out, the earlier you can go and get started on treatment to make that better. The other thing is it just prolongs that stress. We don't operate in the world of the unknown. The human brain is created to crave information. So think about this. Let's say you were meeting a friend for dinner and they didn't show up. You're waiting on them for dinner, they didn't show up. And you said 6 o'clock and they're not there. And they don't call. And you call them and you can't reach them. Your brain is going to go two ways. You have to fill in information. So you're either going to get angry at them because they stood you up and they're not even answering the phone, or you're going to think something awful has happened to them. Either way, then your brain starts to follow those emotions down that path. So it prolongs the stress of not knowing it. It prolongs you being in that realm of, well, it could be this, well, what if it's this, well, it's maybe nothing, well, da-da-da. And nobody wants to get a diagnosis of a chronic illness. Nobody is excited about getting that diagnosis. But I've heard so many people say, I'm so glad we know now, because at least now we know what we're dealing with. At least now we know what we need to do, what decisions we need to make. So it kind of puts that off. And it's exhausting to live in that world of constantly making excuses and explanations and saying, well, it's just this, it's just that, or maybe it's this, or maybe it's nothing, or it could be. That is an exhausting roller coaster ride on a daily basis. So that denial will do that too. The other thing is it prevents you from seeking out help, looking for options. I lead a lot of support groups for Alzheimer's Tennessee, and I work with family caregivers all the time. And I've never, ever heard one say that they're sorry they came or that they're sorry they went and got more information. And you're going to speak about palliative care, so I don't want to steal your thunder, but I've never once heard a family say, I'm so glad we put off palliative care or hospice till the very last minute. They'll never say that, but you know what they will say? Wow, I wish we had done this sooner. Wow, I wish I had had this a year ago. Where was this when I needed it? Well, we were here. You just weren't ready. You weren't ready to ask. So it prevents that off too. Also, important decisions, and I'll tell you, I love the slides that have been, we both were sitting here really admiring that information, going, oh yeah, I was going to say that too, okay, thanks. But,
you can still say it.
It's really good information. And the thing about making important decisions, and this is such an important thing to know, and Gabe certainly at Elder Law can speak to this more, there are documents and things that need to be put in place, and they're so much easier to put in place when your loved one can be involved. Don't you want to be involved in making decisions for your long-term care? What's going to happen to your property? What's going to happen to your money? We don't want to have those decisions. I tried to have this decision with my son a couple of months ago. Y'all, he was nearly in tears and thought I was telling him I was dying. I said, I am fine. We need to talk about this. You need to know my passwords. But here's the really scary thing in the state of Tennessee, and I can't speak to other states. If you don't work with your loved one and have those powers of attorney and have it where you can use their money to take care of them, or you can make medical decisions for them, and if it's something like Alzheimer's disease or maybe another medical condition where they just get to the point where they're on so much medicine, they're not in a capacity, is that the right word, capacity to make that legal decision, then guess what? You have to get something called conservatorship. And that isn't a happy thing. Conservatorship doesn't mean you're the one making decisions. What conservatorship means in Tennessee is you now have sued, taking your loved one to court, you have to sue them and you take away their legal rights. Why would we want to wait and let it get to that situation? So the sooner we know there's something going on, you get an early diagnosis of dementia, you get an early diagnosis of something else that we know it may be terminal. It's so important to make those decisions and have those conversations up front, because I have had in the last 2 years, family members that had no choice but to go to court and get a conservatorship, and it nearly broke their hearts. It's awful. So we don't want to wait. And it also delays in starting treatment. Now, we know now with Alzheimer's disease and some of the other dementias, most of the medications that are out work the very best at the beginning. So the sooner you can start those medications, the better off those medications are going to be. Certainly that's true with other chronic illnesses. If I could catch people in early stages of kidney disease and help them learn how to take care of themselves, to take care of their kidneys, to stop that from progressing rapidly, we can keep them off dialysis for years. So finding out early, yes, it's scary to go and hear that initial diagnosis, but there's so many benefits to you in finding out. So we don't want to stay in that place of denial. The other thing that happens, and literally happens on a daily basis, and I know in your world you see this all the time too, families are left in very, very dangerous situations. I've talked to people with mid-stage Alzheimer's disease, and mom is still living at home because mom doesn't want to go anywhere else. And I'm like, mom is in so much danger. Mom still has a gas stove. Yeah, but she's been cooking on gas her whole life. Not with dementia. She hasn't. Dad's still driving. He's been driving since he was 12 years old. He drove a tractor on the farm. Not with Alzheimer's disease. So we put our loved ones in dangerous situations when we don't want to get that diagnosis and understand what we're dealing with. Do y'all know their dementia Alzheimer's disease? I think they both kind of use the same thing. We look at something called a global deterioration scale. It's stage 1 to stage 7. And most people, by the time they get a diagnosis with Alzheimer's disease, are like a 3.5. So they're already well on their way to hitting that 7, and we're still letting them live alone and still letting them drive and still letting them do all of these things. So very, very dangerous situations we can leave our loved ones in. Another thing about being a caregiver is you become quite the juggler. So all of a sudden, maybe you're this person's wife, but now you're also their primary caregiver. And you know, I want to just put a caveat on that. Sometimes spouses really struggle with that term caregiver because they say, well, of course I'm going to take care of them. I'm his wife. There's a very big difference in doing those little things you do for your loved one every day out of love or from relationship and truly being their care partner, their care provider. Because now suddenly you're making lots of decisions. You're going to lots of different doctor's appointments. You're being given all this information. And a doctor is looking at you and saying, what do you think? What are you going to do? How are we going to handle this? But we have all these different responsibilities. Maybe you're still employed. And that's becoming more and more common as we're seeing Alzheimer's disease and the two others that tend to strike people younger, frontotemporal and Lewy body. Those are in their 40s and 50s. Those are still full-time employed. And maybe they still have children in the home even. So those are very devastating things. You're trying to be an employee, but you're also trying to be a husband. You've got that dual role, and then maybe you still have children in the home, or you're still trying to have your children in your life and grandchildren and do all of those kinds of things. If you're caring for your spouse, you may still have parents that are living and getting older, and we're trying to care for them. And then what about friends? Do you interact with friends anymore? Your church, are you on committees? Are you involved at your church? Do you serve somewhere? And there's all these dual roles, and that dual role really, it can weigh on you as a care partner, as a caregiver. And we talk about the sandwich generation. We've heard that a lot, and that's because we talk about, well, we're taking care of our elderly parents, but we're also still raising children, so we're in a sandwich generation. Y'all, that's only one kind of sandwich. I think we need to have a whole lot more definitions for that sandwich generation, because sometimes you're taking care of a spouse and you're still trying to raise your children. That still is a really big dual role. So there's all those kinds of things. And what I've noticed over the years of working with caregivers is the number one person that gets pushed to the side is me. I'm going to fulfill all these other roles. I've got to do my job. I've got to keep my job. I've got to take care of my loved one that's sick. I've got to still do things for the children and the grandchildren. And caregivers will run themselves completely into the ground. So it's really important to think about that as a team. And you're kind of the captain of that team. And if you don't take care of the captain, none of the other stuff is going to work really well, because you simply cannot continue giving at the level you're giving if you're not doing some things to take care of yourself. Because if you're exhausted, frustrated, angry, worn out, tired, stressed, all of those things, you can't provide the things that your loved one with a chronic illness needs. You can't give somebody all your patience when you're worn out, you don't have any. And we have all seen that happen, right? The child walks in the room, they're having a doggone thing, we snap at them. Why? Because we gave our very last patience to the person ahead of them in line. You know, you've heard that old expression, you come home from work and kick the dog. Well, I hope nobody really kicks their dog. I really like dogs. But you come home and you have a stressful day at work, and the boss has yelled at you, and traffic is horrible, and you have zero tolerance for one more stressor, and so the next thing or person that comes to you, you take it all out on, right? And we do that. If you're worn out, you don't have compassion. You don't have understanding. It's not there to give to the person. And that is why it's so important to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And I don't have time, Cheryl. I'm so busy, I don't have time. We have to find time. We have to somehow look on that calendar, and you need to pencil in self-care, whatever that is for you. For me, it's hiking. So thankfully, I got to do that yesterday. It was a beautiful day. If I can get out in the mountains and all that, that recharges my batteries and refreshes me, and I know that. So even though I'm very, very busy with work in my life, I put that on my calendar. I'll look and I say, I don't care what else is going on this day. I've got to do that. So is it yoga? Is it going for walks? Is it going and having lunch with a friend? Whatever it is, just as you're pulling your calendar out and looking at all the other responsibilities you've got, find those little pockets where you can plug in something that fills your cup, that takes care of you and allows you to recharge your batteries, all right? And there's also a lot of change that comes when you're being a caregiver. And one of the things I see a lot in my world is, like, I see the child kind of becomes the parent. You know, how many of you have children in this room? How many of you are going to really dig it when your children start telling you what you can and cannot do? Yeah, it's not fun. It's a very difficult thing. So when that role changes, it can create a lot of tension. Now, I like to believe, and I'm an optimist, I like to believe that most children really are looking out for their parents, and they really are trying to do what is best for you. That doesn't mean I'm going to like it. If one of my children tells me I can no longer drive, I'm not going to like that at all, and most people don't. So we think about the child becoming the parent, whether it's a dementia or another chronic illness. All these things, and the kids telling the parent, we like to tell them, well, Mom, you've got to go to the doctor. Well, Mom, you know, the doctor said you can't eat that sugar anymore because you're diabetic. Mom, you can't do that. Now, that's because I love Mom, and I want her to be well, right? But suddenly, I'm telling the parent what to do. That's a tough thing to deal with. And then family roles get intermingled with caregiver duties. And one of the things I love, we work with Morning Point a lot over in Middle Tennessee as well. And one of the things that I talk to families about when they're making a decision about bringing in home care or the possibility of moving to assisted living or memory care, I say, look, I know it's a tough decision, but let me tell you what's the best part about this decision. You get to go back to just being wife or daughter or son or husband, because you don't have to do all that caregiving stuff anymore. You don't have to fight over whether they're taking their medication. You've got help with that. You don't have to fight with whether or not they're getting up and doing their physical therapy or exercises anymore. You've got help with that. You let other people do all the yucky stuff, all the hard stuff, and you can go back to just being the family member. And then it gets difficult, and this is that sandwich generation again. It's so difficult to decide between intermingled commitments. And maybe, and I've heard this so much, I had a woman that I worked with her in Knoxville, and she would just get so distraught because she said, I know he's my husband, I know it's my job to take care of him, and I will willingly take care of him, but I have not seen my grandchildren in 2 years. I can't go and see them for their birthdays. I can't go. And it gets really emotional. It's tough because you're having to choose between those things. And they're both equally important. You know, caring for her husband and seeing the grandchildren, they're both wonderful things. But she's having to choose, what do I do? How do I get to do both of these things? And oftentimes you don't get to. It's also watching a strong parent get weak. You know, we look at our parents and we think they're invincible. You know, they're so strong and they can do it all. And then suddenly they're sick and they're weak and their bodies are aren't working right anymore. Or again, in the case of Alzheimer's disease, I'm looking at my dad who has a PhD in chemistry, and now all of a sudden he can't do the simplest of tasks like tie his shoes. That's a tough thing to watch as a caregiver, so that change really comes on and gets us. Unfortunately, there's a lot of family conflict that comes along with this. Families do not always agree, and no matter what disease it is, let's say it's a decision about, you know, does mom have this surgery or not have this surgery? Well, I might feel very strongly she should, because I want mom to live a long time, but maybe mom doesn't want to, and maybe my brother is taking mom's side and saying, well, it's her decision. But she's not thinking clearly. If she would just do what the doctor said, she could get well, and she could live another 20 years. Decision, you know, mom gets to decide, and then sometimes it's different things like that when it comes in the issue of placing someone into assisted living or memory care. Families don't always agree on that, so there can be a whole lot of family conflict coming up as well that we need to think about. And then again, disagreeing with the one needing care. I deal with this so much. Mom has dementia. We all know it. The kids know it. The doctor knows it. But mom says, I'm fine. I don't know why you think anything's wrong with me. I am just fine. I am not leaving this house. You can't make me leave this house. And then it gets really difficult. So sometimes we have those disagreements with that one. And there's also, I hear a lot of families talking about just the feelings that go along with a chronic illness in a family, just the disappointment. Like I said, I worked with a chronic kidney disease, so I worked with a lot of people who ended up on dialysis. And anybody know anybody on dialysis, or anybody ever have a family member? Okay, so you know that's a rough thing. It's 3 days a week. They're in a center having their treatments done. There are ways to do it at home, but most people go 3 days a week. So you're not going on a 2-week-long vacation. You can, but it's quite difficult, right? So that frustration, that disappointment. I once heard a lady who was caring for her husband with Alzheimer's. I'll never forget it. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and she said, Cheryl, these are supposed to be our golden years. There is nothing golden about this. And I've never forgotten that. But yeah, so that disappointment. And then you feel guilty because you feel disappointed because you know the person didn't choose to be sick. But it's okay to still feel disappointed. You know, if your goal was we were going to retire and travel the world, and now because of whatever this illness is, you can't do that, it's okay to feel disappointed. That's a normal human emotion. It's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to be afraid. What we want to encourage you to do is not stay there. So when you stay in those emotions, then it really starts taking over and it becomes a very negative force in your life. So as you're able to talk with a support group, talk with a counselor, I love all the slides up here, your caregiver group here at this church. What a wonderful thing to have. Just find some way to work through those feelings, because if they take root, that's when they become a problem. But it's absolutely normal to feel disappointed, frustrated, afraid. We do all of that as human beings. So caregivers, what do we do? Well, we kind of do what Wiley Coyote does. And I love that I'm in a room full of people that probably know who this is. I speak to lots of different kinds of groups, and sometimes I put Wiley up there and people are clueless. But hopefully some folks in here know who it is. So what was Wiley Coyote's one goal in life? What was he trying to do?
Catch the roadrunner.
Catch the roadrunner. And what was his tactic for catching the roadrunner? What did he do? He did what?
He tried to blow him up.
Yeah. He ordered stuff from Acme, right? Remember ACME? I used to think Acme must be the greatest store in the world. And now it's called Amazon. But, he had one tactic only, and that was, I'm going to order the cool nude trap from Acme. I'm going to put food out and try to trap him. I'm going to do this. I'm going to set this trap. I'm going to set that trap. Did it ever work? He never caught that roadrunner. Frankly, I don't know how he didn't starve to death, but he never did. But what was he doing? Well, he was doing what we as caregivers often do, and that is we do what we've always done. We do what we know to do. All he knew to do was set those traps. That's all he had. His one tool. So we often find ourselves doing what we've always done, and it just doesn't work. No matter what the illness is with your loved one, doing what we've always done isn't going to work. Because if I'm sick and afraid and in pain and frightened, and you don't make some changes to adjust to that, if I've got dementia and you don't make some changes to adjust to that, it's going to set us both up for some pretty difficult situations. So what I say when I'm dealing with Alzheimer's, and as I was getting ready for this, I realized it still applies, and that is that we make things harder on ourselves as the caregiver because we expect things to be the same. Like, for example, your mom is extremely physically sick, but she still wants everybody to come over for Christmas. You know, we're coming up on the holidays. We might have to look at that and realize we got to do something different because if we expect mom to do Christmas as big as she's always done it, it's putting a lot on her, and we might be disappointed when she doesn't. So we have to look at what are our expectations? What are we expecting of this person? And if we don't change those and adapt them as we're dealing with an illness, then we're going to make things harder on ourselves. When we make things harder on ourselves, we also make things harder on the person dealing with the illness. So they can't change, or we can't change the reality, so we have to change our expectations. We have to change, what is this going to look like now? This is what it's always looked like before, Wile E. Coyote, right? This is what we've always done. How are we going to change that now? And different doesn't mean that it can't still be wonderful. You know, maybe everybody pitches in and helps with Christmas dinner this year. No, it won't be Mom's fabulous recipes that we've all come to know and love unless she shared them with somebody. You know how that can be. But it can still be wonderful. So it's us that has to change our expectations. We have to change our responses. Because guess what? If I'm in pain and I'm taking pain medicine that alters me, I might say and do things that will hurt your feelings. So instead of being mad at me or upset at me for what I said or did, if we can change that expectation of, wow, Mom must really be having a rough day today because she normally wouldn't act that way, then that's going to be a game changer for us. So it really is on us to kind of change. So these are some things that a caregiver is going to need to know. And one of them is that no matter what you're dealing with, you're likely going to need help. And the tough part of that is learning to accept it. Human beings are stubborn. And I am a Southern girl. I told you I'm from Georgia. Originally, I lived in Knoxville for years, so Knoxville is home to me. But I'm a stubborn little Southern girl. You know, you don't tell me what to do or push me around, I'll stomp my foot and pitch my little hissy fits. But we have got to learn that it's okay to ask for help. Why is that such a difficult thing to do? And I've got some answers. I've talked to caregivers before that wore themselves into the ground and went and asked for help. Well, why do you think that's so hard? I'd love to hear from you. Why is it so hard to ask somebody for help? Because most of us don't do it. You know, hey, Gabe, is there anything I can do for you? Gabe will say,
no, I'm fine.
I'm fine. Thank you, but we're fine. We're always fine. We're not fine. But why can we not do that? And we were having that conversation a minute ago, and I hope you'll share that story. But, you know, Gabe can be drowning and will not say, Cheryl, I can't even think straight. Will you please just come take the kids to the park for 2 hours and let me just rest? Absolutely. She won't call me and ask me. She'll wear herself out. Why? Why do we do that? Any ideas? All of y'all are just great at calling somebody and telling them you can't handle it?
Vulnerable.
Yeah, it makes us vulnerable. Nobody likes to be vulnerable. What else?
Look, we
Love that one, absolutely. Now, I think that's the #1 answer. I think you win the prize today, yeah. It makes us look weak, or we feel like it makes us look weak. It doesn't, but that's what we're thinking. So we're vulnerable, it makes us look weak. What else? You what? Oh my goodness, are you a Southern Belle or what? I wouldn't want to put you out, honey. I wouldn't want to trouble you. Well, here's the thing. If somebody's asking you and they genuinely mean it, you're not being a burden when they do that for you, because most people would. Some people do. Some funerals we were talking about, it's horrible. I said, let me know if you need anything. Well, I'm grieving. I don't have a clue what I need. But, you know, if you do have a true need, and I encourage my caregivers to write them down. Write down. These are the things that I can't deal with right now. I haven't been to the doctor. I haven't had my hair done in 3 months. I haven't done this. And so when somebody calls and says, hey, how can I help you? Say, you know what? If you would just come sit with my mom for an hour, I would love to go get my hair cut. And the people who really mean it are going to go, what time? And the people who don't mean it are going to tell you they can't. You mark them off the list. Because sometimes people say the socially appropriate thing and they don't mean it. But yeah, so it's a sign of weakness. That's why we don't ask for help. It makes us look weak. It doesn't. It makes us think we look weak. Some people are afraid that if they ask for help, it means I don't care for them anymore. I don't want to take care of them. I want to pass it off on somebody else. And I hear that from the sibling. I often have families, large families, but one sibling is doing all the caregiving. And so the other kids, if they ask for anything, they think, well, you just don't want to take care of mom. I do it all day, every day. I'm asking you for help so I can go to my own doctor's appointment, but they love to pass it off as, well, you just don't want to do it. You just don't care. Not true at all. Sometimes we feel like we're giving up. We're throwing in the towel. We're admitting we can't handle it. We're admitting we're not strong enough. that we just can't do it, and it's not caring. Oh, I hate this one, it's selfish. I did a big presentation years ago, and I talk about this a lot, that self-care isn't selfish. It's not. It is absolutely essential to take care of yourself. And guess what? Sometimes that means taking a break and stepping away from a very difficult and emotional and challenging job. And caring for somebody with a chronic illness can be very challenging and very upsetting. It can just take everything out of you. So it's good to get away, and it's not selfish at all. This one really gets to me. So I worked in, when I first knew that Alzheimer's disease was my passion, I was working at Blunt Memorial down in Maryville. Anybody from Maryville? I love Maryville. But I worked at Blunt Memorial, and we went to see this pastor. He was a pastor of a very large Baptist church there in Maryville. I can't remember the name of it, but it's one that still had that, what do you call it when you have a house they live in? Rectory? Is that right? So he lived next door in the house that the church provided him, and he was caring for his wife. Big church. So I don't know about Methodist, because I grew up Baptist, but a casserole solves everything in the Baptist church. So if somebody said you take casserole, somebody dies, you take a casserole, or people bringing food. So this man was wearing himself out caring for his wife. He had a church full of sweet little Baptist church ladies in their casseroles wanting to come over and help. They would want to bring food. They would want to come in and take care of her. They would want to come and help bathe and dress her. They would want to come and stay with her so that he could leave. And he said no every single solitary time. I mean, I'm telling you, the man was haggard. The man was wearing himself out. You could see it in his face. Would not let anybody come. And I said, Pastor, I've seen these women knocking at the door as I was coming up. They said we would do anything for him. He's taking such good care of us and our families. We want to help, and he just won't let us. And so I asked him about that, and this is what he said. He said, as my wife, I made a vow to care for her, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health. I will do that. I will not have anybody else take care of her. And I had to think about that for a while. And I did. And I came back and I saw him, and I said, Pastor, I read those vows. I took those vows when I got married too. And I said, let me tell you something. I don't see the sentence after that says, all by myself without any help until I run myself completely into the grave. That's not in that vow. What if taking care of her in sickness and in health means I can let these other people come in and help me so that I can be stronger and I can have energy to continue taking care of her? What if it's okay that you gave your whole life, you and your precious wife gave to this church? You were there for every death, every divorce, every sick child. How many times did you go and give to these people, and they want to give back to you? And you keep saying no. What if bringing in that help is a beautiful way of honoring that vow? And I wish I could say this the first time I've heard that as a reason not to accept help, but it was the first. It was not the last. I've heard that repeatedly from spouses. That is my husband. I will take care of him. And I use that all the time now. I get it, but I don't see the part where it says all by myself until I run myself into the grave. That's not part of that vow. So we talk a lot about what does it mean to provide the very best care? What does that look like? And sometimes it looks like hiring an in-home care agency. Sometimes it looks like placing my loved one in a wonderful community like Morning Point or one of the others. So it's not about not honoring your vows if you ask for help. It's about, think about saying it this way. I can't provide the level of care to my loved one that I want to provide as one human being. Therefore, I'm going to enlist some help so that I can do the very, very best job possible. Maybe we should think about it that way. And then it's a big I can't handle it. I think somebody said that one too. So those are things. And then also asking for help creates that family strife. Remember I said earlier, if one sibling is providing most of the care and they ask the other siblings, it's like the siblings act like, oh no, you got it. You got this, you're doing a great job. It amazes me how often, and I know you see it in your work too, it is unbelievable how one sibling can be, I don't want to say stuck, because of course they want to do it, but they're put in that position of doing it all by themselves, and the other siblings are just, I'm out, I'm not having anything to do with it. Unless that sibling makes a decision or does something that the others don't like. And then they have a whole lot to say. That sometimes the strongest opinions are the people that have the least to do with the care, especially those that live across the country. Any of y'all have that in that situation where you're caring for someone and you've got siblings across the country? Boy, they know everything you ought to be doing, don't they? And they're not here helping, but boy, they have some strong opinions. So that one, yeah, it creates that family strife. And also, I created a saying several years ago, we don't ask for help sometimes, but have you heard me say that?
I quote it all the time.
That's where I started laughing. So I said this years ago in a caregiver workshop like this. I said, but you got to think about it. Help isn't helpful unless it's helpful. That's going to sink in about 2 hours, right? But help isn't helpful unless it's helpful. And let me give you an example. When I was married, my mother-in-law, a great housekeeper, her house was clean with 5 children, cleaner than mine ever was, and she would come and she would start doing all this stuff. And she'd do the kitchen. I appreciate it, it was great. But she did the laundry, and I just had this thing about her doing my personal items. I don't know why. I didn't like it. And it just made me nuts. And I told my husband, I said, can you ask her not to do that? And he goes, well, she just wants to help. While she's here, she knows you're busy with the kids. She just wants to help. And I said, I don't like that. So for me, what she was doing to help me was stressing me out. You see what I mean? Help isn't helpful unless it's helpful. So we don't ask for help sometimes because we know that having somebody in our house is going to stress us out more than it's going to help us. So sometimes you just have to find what that thing is that is helpful. And it may not be what they think. Like they might offer, let me come and I'll come and I want to come and clean your house for you so you don't have to do it. Well, if I'm really particular, that's not going to make me happy. But I would love it if they would take my grocery list and go to the store for me because I personally cannot stand going to the grocery store. I have to, but I don't like it. So I can choose those things that are helpful. So then sometimes that's why we don't either. We don't accept help because it's not going to be helpful to us. So I'm so glad you remember that. So a couple of words I want everybody to think about. This is a little exercise you can do if you're a caregiver. How many of you are currently in a care providing situation with a loved one? Big group of us? Okay. So this is what I want you to do. So I know we've been sitting for a little bit, so you can just take your head and look to the roof, and then look to the floor, and look to the ceiling, and look to the floor. And the next time somebody says, is there something I can do for you? Hey, I'm going to the store. Can I pick something up for you? You can do this motion. And you can say these words, yes, please. Right? And I encourage you to make a yes, please list. Well, what in the world is a yes, please list? Well, a yes, please list is all those things that you cannot get to. Haircuts, your own doctor's appointments, lunch with a daughter, going to visit their grandchildren, going to the grocery store to get milk and bread because they've been out and you just cannot leave your loved one to go do that. So when someone calls and they ask that very generic question, is there anything I can do for you? Do that. Do it again. I didn't see that. Help you again. Yes, please. And then go to that list. Because here's the thing. It's very hard in the moment to think about what those things are. When you're in a crisis, I was sharing a story earlier. I got attacked by a dog in March. And I'm not going to brush all out. We're at lunch. But I needed help. And I'm sitting there in this crisis mode. And it took me forever to think about who can I call. I've got tons of friends and tons of people I know. It just took me a while to think about it. But if I had a yes, please list, who is the person that says to me, I will be there, if you have an emergency? Who are those people that say, listen, if you ever need help getting your dad to the doctor, I know it's hard to get him out of the car, I'm right next door, call me and I will help you. Write that down. Who is the person that will call you from Walmart and say, hey, I'm at Walmart, do you need anything? Let me know if I can pick anything up for you. Who are the people that offer to do errands? Write it down, because when you're in the moment, you don't think about it. And then, so that's your who do I know list, and your yes please list is what are the things that you do need. So when somebody calls generically and says, is there anything I can do for you? Yes, please. Would you please just come stay with mom for 1 hour so I can go get a haircut, or so I can go have lunch with my daughter? I haven't spent time with my daughter outside the bedside in 2 months. I would love to just get out. Yes, please. We have to think about that and know that it's not all those weaknesses and things. All right, next one. Your loved one may do and say things that are going to be hurtful. And it's really important that we can look at our loved one and remember that this is the disease talking and not our loved one. I hear all the time from family members saying, my dad would never talk to my mom like that. And I go, you're right. But your dad with Alzheimer's disease will. My mom would never treat me that way. I was trying to help her, and she started yelling and screaming. Well, maybe we were hurting her and didn't realize her. She's in a whole lot of pain. My mom would never talk to me that way. You're right. But your mom, who's in pain and dealing with this chronic disease, might. So we kind of have to have what I call double vision. Look at our loved one, know that it's them, recognize who they are, how they have treated us, what our relationship has been, but recognize that when you see these behavior changes, these attitude changes, the way they treat you, the way they talk to you, okay, is that my dad, or is that my dad with Alzheimer's disease? And this person who just yelled at me, is that my mom, or is that my mom who's dying of this disease and she's in a lot of pain? And she spoke to me from a place of pain. How many of y'all are your nicest, kindest, sweetest, and all that when you're in a lot of pain? Anybody in here want to say that you are your best of the best? No. So we all do that. So we have to recognize that and look, wow, I can't, and she's trying the best she can, but she's just in so much pain that it'll come off, with a really nasty attitude. So have that double vision to really help you. Think of it like this. If you all live in this beautiful church, and we're a Methodist church, we would all do the right thing, I'm sure. But if you saw somebody trip on a curb out in front of your church, and you went over to try to help them, and they started yelling and cussing and screaming at you and telling you, get away from me, I hate you, don't touch me, you're just trying to hurt me. You, after a minute, go, oh my gosh, and walk away, and maybe look at your friend and go, can you believe that? We were just trying to help, and then you let it go. Now imagine that's your mom, and your mom trips on the curb, and you go up and try to help her, and she says those same things. Get away from me, take your hands off of me, I hate you, you're just trying to hurt me. Now it goes straight here, right? But if we can have that double vision and recognize that that's not my mom speaking, that's the pain, that's the medication, that's the Alzheimer's disease, that's the fear, then it can really just help us separate the emotions. Because first woman, we talk about and forget all about her, but when mom or dad or loved one says that to us, it gets us right here, right? So trying to have that double vision is really helpful. All right, so the next thing you're going to need to know is that you have got to take care of yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually. We talked about that a bit earlier. It's not selfish to have self-care. What does that look like? I don't know, because I'm not you. For me, my friend yesterday said, I just don't know what my thing is. I'm trying to figure out, what is my one thing? And I said to her, I said, well, what's my thing? She goes, oh, you're easy. Hiking, dancing, live music. And that's true, those are my things, and I know that. So I make room in my life on a regular basis to either hike, ballroom dance. You didn't know that? That's new since I moved to Middle Tennessee. I took up ballroom dancing, it's great. And I love listening to music, all kinds of music. I'll just go and find different venues. So you gotta have your thing, and that's what takes care of me mentally, because I enjoy that. Taking those breaks physically. 30-minute walk 3 times a week. One of the best things you can do for your health and to prevent dementia. 30-minute walk 3 times a week. If you do it with a friend, even better. Because then you've got that social aspect and the physical exercise. And then spiritually, being involved in a faith community like this, praying about these things, sharing with your small group or your Sunday school class. We got to do that. These are some other things about taking care of yourself, and I love that you've got the caregiver focus here, because it does give you, just like today, getting some education, learning all that you can. If it's kidney disease, learn all you can. If it's some type of cancer, learn all you can. If it's Alzheimer's, learn all you can. Because the more you understand, the more you know. We had hospice come in with my mom. I was sharing about that with you. And just the way that they shared with us what was coming and what to expect was amazing, because we didn't have to be so afraid when we saw something. We went, okay, they told us this was going to happen. It made it not easy, because it's never easy to lose someone you love, but it made it much less terrifying, because we weren't operating in that realm of the unknown. We knew. Support groups, I can't say enough about how I feel about support groups. I lead those in Middle Tennessee, and they're fantastic. To the extent that you can, maintaining those relationships with your siblings, it's not always possible, and I'm a social worker and a counselor. I'm okay sometimes with setting boundaries up, or all the time with setting boundaries up with people that are harming you. Sometimes you can't always work it out, but to the extent that you can, setting those boundaries. Addressing guilt. There's something about becoming a caregiver and taking care of your loved one that makes us feel guilty. We actually, it's a form of survivor's guilt. Y'all heard of that? Like there's a car crash and other people get killed, but you live, and you feel guilty about it. Well, it's not your fault. You didn't do that. That's just the way it played out. Same with this. When someone gets a chronic illness, a chronic disease, or someone dies before us, we feel guilty. And I can't figure that out. Why do I feel guilty? I didn't wish this disease on a loved one. I didn't do anything to make it happen. It just did. And here I am beating myself up because I'm not the one dealing, or I can still walk without a walker or a wheelchair. I can still go and do these things. I can still remember, whatever it is, but we got to deal with that guilt, and that's where the support groups come in. So support groups, counseling, you've got a state ministry here, all of those kinds of things are ways to take care of yourself. And my support group I love, because we can be very open and real there. And I told this story, and she said I could tell it. I won't say her name, but I do an online support group, and we logged in, and this one wife one time, she was the first one to pop in the room. I opened it, and there she was, and I saw her face, and she was murdered. She goes, I'm going to kill him. I said, what? She goes, I'm going to kill him. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to Kelly, if he asked me one more time about whatever it was, I'm just going to lose it. I'm just going to kill him. I said, okay, take a deep breath. First of all, you do not look good in orange, so you're not going to kill him. And I said, and secondly, what in the world? And so we talked about it. She had a really rough day, and those are the words that came out of her mouth. No, I knew she didn't mean it, but what I loved was she felt safe enough to be that raw, vulnerable, open in that group. And it's because of the relationship she developed. She knew she could trust them. So I can't say enough about those support groups. And we talked about making yourself a priority and then keeping your cup full. That goes back to that adage you hear that you can't pour from an empty cup. So what is it that's going to keep your cup full? And that's all that self-care again. It's absolutely vital. All right, these are some of the things that I've heard caregivers tell me that they feel. These are 100% absolutely normal. We are human beings. I love it when I speak to churches because when they say, oh, it's a sin to be angry. I said, you remember that whole temple and money changer story? Who was that got angry? You know, no, anger is normal. We are humans. It is a normal emotion. Being upset, being frustrated, being embarrassed. Sometimes loved ones feel so guilty because they say, oh, we went to a restaurant and he did this and he did that. And everybody was looking at us and I was so embarrassed and now I just feel guilty. I said, why? That kind of sounds like most people would be embarrassed by that. And we all know that he didn't mean to behave that way. We have some cards at Alzheimer's Tennessee that say, please pardon any unexpected behaviors from a loved one. He has Alzheimer's disease. And I love those cards and I give those out to caregivers and say, just take these. And it's an education, and then shame on them for looking at you or talking about you, and then you get a chance to show them. It could be them one day. But all of those are normal, and what I say is just don't get stuck there. Recognize when you're feeling angry, when you're feeling frustrated, when you're feeling just so sad because all of your friends are going to visit grandchildren for Christmas and you can't. It's okay to feel sad about that. It's okay to be disappointed that you're not traveling around on a cruise. But if you stay there, now it can really turn into depression. It can turn into stress. It can get stuck, and you're stuck in that emotional place where you really can't do anything. And then, like I said, they all deal to that one, or lead to guilt. So guilt is like carrying around a bag of rocks. Guilt will do nothing but make you feel bad, make you feel worse, and keep you from being able to make good decisions and all that. So guilt, what do you say? Oh, I shouldn't. And I love it. I saw the shoulds on one of those slides earlier. It was talking about the shoulds. We can't live in the realm of the shoulds. Because guess what? We have a saying, if you've seen one person with Alzheimer's disease, you've seen exactly one person with Alzheimer's disease. What works for your friend and her husband may or may not work for you with your husband. We don't know because every person is different. Every one of us is a unique human being, and that disease in particular affects us differently. Oh, it's so wrong for me to enjoy myself when she can. I shouldn't go visit the kids for Christmas because I can't take them. That's a big should, especially if you're in a community. Have you seen what these communities do around the holidays? They do everything to make sure that your loved one is cared for. They have activities, it's festive. It's okay. And I had to come to accept this, that I do not have to celebrate my birthday on May 26th for it to count. That took me a long time. And it took my kids moving away from home. And then suddenly I went, oh, so we can see each other the weekend before and that counts. Oh, well, yeah. I was that way. I admit it. I'm ashamed. But it was like, well, how can we not be together on my birthday and I wouldn't enjoy it? But guess what? If you celebrate, what's the point? The point is to celebrate the special occasion. It doesn't have to be on that date. So you can celebrate with your loved one who's in assisted living or memory care or the hospital on the day, maybe the day before, and then you can still go and see the children and grandchildren the next day, and that's not doing them wrong. It's not doing them dirty. We don't have to feel guilty about that because it is okay for you to enjoy your life. You absolutely can still live your life, and your loved one would want that if they were able to tell you to. I hear people all the time, oh no, I just can't leave them at home. I can't possibly leave them at home with a caregiver to go do that. Why not? That's what you're paying them for. Blows my mind. I will see wives especially. Wives will hire in-home caregivers, have them come 4 hours for $35 an hour, and they are not about to leave that home because they're going to watch everything that person is doing. I'm like, then don't hire them. You're wasting your money. So if you hire somebody to help you, or if you have a family member come and they say, I want to come stay with dad, mom, so you can get out for a couple hours, go. It's really okay to go, and that's part of that self-care. The guilt, oh my goodness, the people that beat themselves up. I'm a terrible caregiver, I messed up, I lost my temper this morning, I raised my voice, I got so frustrated. Okay, so you're human, that's cool, because I'm human too, and I do those things too. All right, so you're not a terrible caregiver. You're not a terrible caregiver just because you do some of those things. And the beauty of it is tomorrow's a new day. So whatever happened today, tomorrow Tomorrow is a new day. Go back, apologize, try your best to do it differently the next day. And when I tell families all the time, if they are dealing with Alzheimer's disease, this is one of those times where you let short-term memory loss work for you. Because chances are you're going to be still beating yourself up about this tomorrow, and your loved one is not even going to remember that it happened. So let go, because they haven't stored that short-term memory, so don't beat yourself up. All right, this is something that one of my caregivers says in support group, and she did this on a webinar. Is anybody dealing with Lewy body dementia in the room? I don't see a Lewy body. Okay, so we did a really, really good webinar a couple weeks ago with an expert on Lewy body, and then I had 3 family caregivers come on, and it's housed on our website. Gabe can help you find it if you'd like to see it. But it's on our website, alzheimerstennessee.org. And we specifically address Lewy body because it's very different from Alzheimer's. And one of my caregivers talked about the 3 C's, and I love this, so I asked her if I could share it. But she said this is what she has to tell herself when she starts feeling guilty and upset. So, I didn't cause it. I didn't cause him to have this disease. You know, I can't control it, meaning when he's on medication, he sees a doctor, but if he has a delusion, a hallucination, if he engages in some behavior when you're out in public, she can't control it. She can do her best to work with him. She can't control it, and she can't cure it. There's no cure for that. So if you're dealing with an incurable disease, those 3 C's I think are really powerful for caregivers to accept that you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and if it's one that is terminal, you can't cure it. So once you let go of that and take those layers of guilt off, what can you do? Well, that's when you can start doing all the things to work with them, that making the changes. With dementia, we live in their world. With other chronic illnesses, instead of focusing on what they can't do anymore because they're sick, what are all the things they can still do? And I'm a big Christmas person. I can't wait. Well, November, I do wait until November. I'm not one of those people, but not like that. But day after Thanksgiving, it's time to decorate for Christmas. Well, there's going to come a day, well, I may not be able to do that anymore. I'll be older, I won't be able to do it. Hopefully my kids will continue that tradition, but if they can't, does that mean Christmas is over for me? No, it'll have to be different. So maybe I'm physically sick and I can't run up and down the attic stairs, but can my kids put me in the car and drive me around and look at Christmas lights? Can we go to church programs that are beautifully decorated and listen to music? Sometimes it's just about finding things different to still do. I saw this up on the slide too. We have got to let go of those woulda, coulda, shouldas, and if onlys. We have got to let that go. That is nothing but guilt-inducing. You don't know what you should have done because you didn't do it. And I love how we beat ourselves up saying, well, if only I had done it this way. You don't know. You could have done something different and the result could have been exactly the same. But boy, do we live in that realm of if only and I should have and if only I had and I would have. We don't know. We can't live. And that's a really awesome thing about making a choice. Once you make a choice, you've given up your ability to know what would have happened if you made the other choice. You can't go back in time and choose the other thing. So that woulda, coulda, shoulda is nothing but you torturing yourself because something didn't go well, but you truly have no idea if it would have gone differently had you done it differently. The other thing I find as I work with caregivers is we will not admit that we are stressed. That is a dirty word in our country. I want you to count those letters. That is not a 4-letter word, but we treat it like it is. Say, you look stressed. Oh, I'm fine. Okay, if I said, hey, are you okay? You look really stressed today. I'm fine. We're always fine. She's fine. She's not stressed. Why? Because stressed is a dirty word. Because stressed is almost like that whole why don't we ask for help? It's like, well, if I say I'm stressed, I can't handle my life, or I'm weaker than everybody else, because she's handling it just fine. I mean, Sally takes care of her husband and her children and has 3 grandchildren living with her, and she still works a full-time job. You do not know what it's like in Sally's house, because you're not there, but we do that, right? That comparison game all the time. We don't want to admit that we're stressed. Okay, so don't admit that you're stressed. Are you short-tempered? Do you get aggravated a lot easier than you used to? Maybe you just can't handle stuff as much as you did? Okay, we can say short-tempered. Have you found yourself socially withdrawing? Maybe you always loved coming to your church activities and gatherings, and suddenly you just don't have the energy, you just don't want to do it anymore. Pay attention to that. Okay, you don't have to tell me that you're stressed out, but you can say, you know, I just don't enjoy those things anymore. Okay, then let's get in a support group or let's talk to somebody, right? Anxiety, that feeling of just that elephant on your chest, just a feeling of just fretfulness and fear of the unknown or what might happen. Are you exhausted? Are you sleepless? Anybody in here have difficulty sleeping? Okay, number 1 thing you can do to help prevent Alzheimer's disease is fix that. So talk to somebody, talk to a doctor, go to a sleep specialist. We know that sleep and or lack thereof is one of the precursors to folks developing Alzheimer's down the road, because there are things that happen, I won't go into it, but things in our brain happen while we're sleeping. And every year we have research symposiums, and every year they talk about the importance of sleep and sleep studies. So we've got to get enough sleep. So if you're a caregiver and you don't get enough sleep, you're going to be grouchy the other day, you're going to be short-tempered, you're going to be exhausted, and guess what? That's going to make you act like you're stressed, and that's what we don't want to say, right? So you got to get that sleep. That irritability. The other thing that happens when you are a caregiver, or when you're stressed, whether it's work or home life, or because of being a caregiver, if you're really overworked like that, you can become forgetful. You can have difficulty concentrating. And it's not funny, but it's funny to me because I've heard it so much. I've had so many people say to me, well, I'll tell you what, I begin to think this is contagious because I can't remember a doggone thing. I forgot my own doctor's appointment last week. I said, no, Alzheimer's isn't contagious, but you're stressed. Let's talk about it. When you're overwhelmed, you can't think, you can't function. So it can look like that. Depression also can mimic dementia. So we want to make sure if we're feeling depressed that we're getting that looked at. And then the other thing that's really sad and upsetting to me is that we know that caregivers who don't take care of themselves, a caregiver for someone with a chronic illness or with Alzheimer's disease, they tend to end up having more health problems, more doctor's visits and hospitalizations, and they die sooner than the person they're caring for. And that's because of all that stuff we've talked about, because we don't take care of ourselves. We put everything into caring for a loved one, but if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of our loved one because we're going to wear ourselves out. So chronic stress says that's the number one threat to a caregiver's well-being because we don't tend to it. So things like taking a responsibility. It's one thing when you're a parent and you are totally responsible for a child because they can't do anything. It feels very different when you're totally responsible for a 70-year-old. It just changes things. You know, suddenly you're telling that person what they can and can't do, or you're tending to all of their needs, and they're an adult. Maybe they had a PhD. Maybe they were a doctor, and suddenly you're responsible for all of that. Those expectations, we already talked about those unmet expectations. The other thing that's really difficult is suddenly you're making all the decisions. So let's just say, I'm a woman, so I'm just going to say it's a husband. If the husband always made the mortgage and the insurance and the car buying decisions and handled all the banking and those are taking care of the house, like all those things, and now suddenly because of this illness, now you're having to take all that on as a wife. That's tough. You're making decisions about things that you really maybe never even thought about before because that's just the way the roles were divided. Now sometimes it's different. Sometimes it's the wife who takes care of all the finances and paying the bills and the insurance and all that. And it's a husband. Do y'all know how many times I've had families come to me and the wife got dementia and the kids are saying, Daddy doesn't even know how to boil water. Mom took care of everything. He didn't. You would think a grown man would know how to make a bologna sandwich, right? Didn't know how to use a microwave one because he never had to do it. We were having this conversation about spreadsheets earlier. I never had to do one. I didn't know how to do it. So thinking that, so taking over those responsibilities, that's really hard. And then there's that disruption of life and lifestyle. That's really a tough one too that can cause a lot of stress. And that goes back to those, can we still go visit the kids for Christmas? Can the grandkids come over? Sometimes they can. Sometimes it's just way too much when you're caring for someone in the home. Sometimes we've got a lot of medical equipment in the home and you just don't think it's safe for little children to come over. My own daughter one time reached her hand into some kind of thingy that had some needles in I don't know why they were exposed, but I used needles and she got her hand really close and I grabbed it and yanked it out real quick. It scared me half to death. Well, if you've got that kind of medical equipment, sometimes you have to be concerned, right, about having children in the home. In the case of Alzheimer's, sometimes it's just too overwhelming to have a bunch of children come in the home. So it disrupts that life and lifestyle. Isolation. So we must be around other people. God made us, and what's in Genesis, what he say, it's not good for man to be alone. Those are his words, not mine, okay? But the studies have come out over and over and over and over that social isolation kills. Social isolation is actually deadly. You can die from being lonely. Why? Because there's a lot about this, being with other people, having conversations, being in relationships that keeps us mentally and emotionally and spiritually and physically healthy. So that isolation, that can cause a lot of stress because you do feel like it's you against the world. You feel like you're all by yourself. And you are, if you've created that setting, you're all by yourself because you created it that way. But also when we're feeling stressed, on the flip side of that, we don't have the energy to go out. I just don't have the energy to get dressed and go to this meeting. I cannot imagine having to go to church and shake a bunch of people's hands and say, good morning, God bless you. I can't. So we find ourselves isolating, but it's really, really the worst thing for us. Sometimes it's better just to push through and go and have that social interaction because it's good for us. All right, so this is a story. This is a lady lived in a assisted living. I can't remember if she's on the memory care side or not, but she was seeing Jesus. And I don't mean praying, I mean physically, literally, she was having hallucinations. Jesus would come into her room, sit in her room, have conversations with her. And the children said, you've got to do something about this, Dr. Stevenson, you've got to do something about this. Mom's having these hallucinations. Mom cannot have these hallucinations, go fix it. So he goes and assesses her, and she is in fact seeing Jesus. He comes right in the room, he sits in a chair, they have these conversations, and he observed her. And he went back to the kids and said this. He said, have you ever seen your mom after she's had these visits with Jesus? She is so joyful. She has so much peace. It makes her so happy. And I love this guy for saying this. Why do you want me to medicate that away from her? Think about that for a minute. When we hear somebody's having hallucinations, seeing things that aren't there, hearing things that aren't there, believing things that aren't true, the first thing we want to do is send them to psych and get them on medication because they're having hallucinations and delusions, right? So who is that really about? When a loved one says, I don't want treatment anymore. You have to have treatment. You can't give up. You've got to go to another doctor. We'll go to another specialist. There's got to be something else. Or what about when our loved one says, I'm tired of fighting this battle. I'm ready to go. Well, Mama, you can't. You can't go. So we have to think about that, because who is that really about? At that point, it becomes more about us as the family member and the caregiver than it is about our loved one. We don't treat every delusion or hallucination, because if it's not bothering the person, it doesn't matter. If a person says, I don't want to have another painful treatment, I don't want another surgery, it's the right thing to do to let them make that decision. Now, it stinks for us, because we recognize we might lose our loved one much sooner than we wanted to, right? And I see older folks all the time say, I'm ready to go. Maybe their husband or wife passed 10 years ago. They're ready to go. No, you can't. That's the toughest part about being a caregiver, is trying to open ourselves up to make decisions, or to allow the person with the actual disease to make those decisions for themselves instead of us making the decisions for ourselves. And I don't say that to make anybody feel bad. I did it too. When my mom had cancer, I said, but Mom, you gotta have more treatment. You gotta have more of this. Years later, I can look back and go, wow, I was a selfish daughter. I didn't want to lose my mom. But she had already been through very painful stuff, and how wrong it was to push her to do more painful stuff, because she made her decision, and we all had to accept it. But it was about me at that time, right? All right, so before we cry, let's move on. So how do we deal with that? We're going to seek out friends who understand. I bolded that word, understand. A lot of us have friends, but they will say these, and we were talking about this earlier, we kind of talked about the whole presentation together. So a lot of us have friends, but they'll say what they think they're supposed to say. We say these socially acceptable things, mostly because we don't know what to say. So I didn't put this slide up here, but there's a great book, and I can email it to you if you want to share it. It's called What to Do When You Don't Know What to Say. And it's the most beautiful book, because it's about, there's nothing you can say to make my pain go away. If I have a terminal illness, there's nothing you're going to say to make me feel better about it, because I've still got a terminal illness. If I've just lost a loved one, there's not a thing you can say that's going to make it hurt any less. Thank you for trying, but it's not. So sometimes those things can be very hurtful. When people were saying things to me about my mom dying, and this was my personal favorite, oh my gosh, I can't imagine what it's like. I can't imagine losing my mom. I don't know what I would do if I lost my mom. I was going, seriously? That's what you're going to say? They didn't know what to say, so sometimes they say kind of stupid things. They mean well. I believe most people mean well. Find those friends that understand. Find that friend that you can go to. Gabe, I can't deal with this anymore. I am exhausted. I'm yelling at my husband. The kids are driving me crazy. And hopefully Gabe is going to say something beautiful like,
I don't know. I'm here.
I mean, yeah, that's all it said. I'm here. What do you need? What can I do for you? You don't have to have a beautiful thing. And I know we're in a church, and God forgives me for this, because I've heard pastors say it, but sometimes even quoting scripture, that's not going to help me. We do it because we think that's the right thing to do, but sometimes that doesn't. So sometimes it's more about being rather than saying. Just sit with me while I cry. One of the best things somebody did was they walked in my house, brought me a casserole. She wasn't even Baptist, and she knew the casserole rule. She brought me a casserole, and she looked at me and she said, Cheryl, I have no idea what to say to you right now, but I'm here. And out of all the beautiful beatitudes and scriptures that were quoted and things that people said to me, what is the one thing I remember 30 years after losing my mother? Cheryl, I have no idea what to say to you right now, but I'm here. That's it. That's all I remember. Why? Because it was raw and real and honest.
So just be you, but find those friends that'll let you be a jerk. I've got a friend I can call and just rail about whatever's going on, and she'll go, are you done now? Yeah. Do you feel better? Well, what do you want to do tonight? That's great. She doesn't judge me. She's like, oh, Cheryl's just so ugly. She's got such a bad attitude. She understands. Sometimes you have a rough day. So find those people that you can be you with, and it may not be a family member, and it may not be your close friends. And again, that's why I love support groups. They understand. You come to support group, they've got your back because they're there too. Prayer and ministry, certainly reach out to pastors, the Stephen ministry, having folks pray for you. And I'm a family counselor by training. I didn't say that at the beginning, but that's my background. I'm a big fan of counseling. You know, sometimes it is just too much to handle by yourself. Sometimes even if you have friends and families there for you, they just don't quite know what to do and how to help you. So talking to a counselor, guess what? They don't have an emotional attachment to the situation. Or if you're from Georgia, you say, they ain't got a dog in that fight, right? So they can be more impartial. They can just help you address what you're dealing with without knowing your sister, your mom, your dad, your brother. They're just going to listen to you. So I'm a big fan of that if you need that. All right, some other things are forgive yourself daily. You are not perfect. And so sometimes at the end of the day, you just pray and say, you know, I did the very best I could. And tomorrow's a new day. But forgive yourself. Please don't get in the habit of beating yourself up, blaming yourself, playing the woulda, coulda, shoulda. All you can do is the best you can do with what you've got. And nobody in here, other than maybe two of us, have the little tagline behind our professional titles that we are considered caregiving experts. I don't like that word, but caregiving specialists. We speak on caregiving all the time. Everybody else in here is winging it, you know, most of you. So you're not going to get it right. Guess what? I don't get it right. Every day. When I'm working with families, I say, look, I can share with you what has worked for other families. I can't guarantee you this is going to work with your dad. You can try it, and guess what? If it doesn't work, tomorrow we're going to try something different. I know with medication, that's true. They will try a medication and say, let's try this, and if it doesn't work, we're going to change it. We'll try something else. So sometimes you just got to forgive yourself. It's not your fault that things didn't go well today. It's not your fault that you lost your cool. I already told you that's going to happen, right? Walk away. I love the whole walking away and count to 10. We teach our children to do that to calm down, but I want us to remember that that does not stop working just because we get older. There is something about just walking away from a situation, breathing 10 deep breaths, walk back in, that is going to change. For one thing, it lets the emotions just cool out. This works in marriages, it works with children, it works in caregiving. It lets you just kind of cool out. Just walk away for a minute. When you walk back in the room, after you've kind of chilled, when you walk back in, you're kind of seeing things through fresh eyes. You're a little bit renewed, it's going to feel a little bit differently. So walk away, take a breather, laugh daily. Laughing releases endorphins in the brain. It releases natural happy chemicals. It releases pain relieving chemicals. Laughter is fantastic on a daily basis for all of us. So find something that tickles you. I love a good dad joke. I tell you, you can call me up and tell me a dad joke, and I'm going to be rolling on the floor laughing because I think they're just so dumb and wonderful. So find what it is for you. Maybe it's old I Love Lucy reruns. Maybe it's you have a friend that always makes you. I've got a friend right now, without fail, will make me laugh when we're on the phone or even texting, just that witty humor. So if I'm having a bad day, I might just send a text, hey, what are you doing? And it might be something like, oh, well, I was just about to jump out of the plane skydiving, but you need something? You know, I love that. It makes me laugh. So I do that. I laugh daily. Practice the self-care techniques. We kind of talked about that. Positive self-talk. Do you know that in a given day, you will say 5 or 10 negative things for every one positive thing to yourself? We talk to ourselves all the time. Now, I don't mean like this. Hey, Cheryl, how are you? Oh, I'm doing great, Cheryl. How are you? I don't mean that. I just mean the messages we replay over and over. I messed up. I'm a horrible caregiver. I can't believe I lost my temper. I can't get anything right. You know what? I am doing a great job. I'm the only sibling that has agreed to take this on and not turn my back on what mom and dad need right now. I take time away from my family to be here for my parents. That's good. I'm doing the very best I can. I'm learning. I'm going to a support group. I'm reading books. Anything that you can say to yourself that's positive, say that, because you've got to battle all the negativity. And guess what? Everybody else in the world loves to tell you negative stuff. They love to tell you how, well, I would never put my husband in Morning Point. I would never put my husband in assisted living. And I said, well, you don't know because you're not there yet. But they love to make you feel bad for the choices you're making, right? So talk positively to yourself. Exercise, we already talked about that, and praying. Also, I love this part. Everybody is an expert. So when people give you all this wonderful advice of what they would do if they were you and what you ought to do or what you should do, or they tell you what they read in the National Enquirer that's going to kill this disease, We got, y'all all know who that is, right? Y'all got grandkids and kids. Elsa, let it go, let it go. We just gotta let it go. Sometimes there's nothing else you can do except let it go. You can try to argue. I argued with somebody last week. It didn't end well for them. Great for me because I won. Kidding. But you can argue. But no, most people, they're not going to get it. And I think most people truly are trying to help. If they tell you, hey, listen, I was thinking about your mom's got Alzheimer's disease, and I read this article when I was standing in line at the grocery store that said if you eat 25 boiled eggs a day, it'll cure Alzheimer's. I mean, I really think they're trying, they don't know what to say. So they're trying to say something. So sometimes we just got to let it go. Because people can say the dumbest things, meaning well. Or you're going to be like a duck, so not taking it personally. Remember, ignorance is bliss. Wow, you really don't have a clue what this is like, being a caregiver. Wow, you know nothing about Alzheimer's disease, do you? He is smiling. Yeah, thank you. You know, I do think most people mean well. I don't think most people come up to you to tell you something to make you feel bad. So you're smiling like, okay, and say, well, thank you, I'll take a look at that. Or my favorite is, oh, okay, I appreciate you sharing that with me. I'll let our doctor know. Or I'll ask our doctor what he thinks. This is especially true of siblings that live across the country. I'm dealing with one girl right now that her sibling that lives across the country is constantly sending her articles of things that they ought to try. And I keep training her again. I say, Angela, just say, thank you. I'll ask her doctor about that. You know, her doctor's doing a great job. Thank you, I'll ask the doctor about that. Oh, okay, pomegranates, yeah, sure, I'll ask the doctor about it. Standing on your head and whistling Dixie, great, yeah, we'll try that. You know, I mean, people really are just, we're so at a loss with Alzheimer's, again, in particular, that we're grasping at anything we can find that will give us hope, because it's such a scary disease. So just, you know, thank you, maybe I will, da-da-da. And the other thing is give yourself a little credit. I find oftentimes that the caregiver that's here caring for the person with a chronic illness, when these other siblings have these grand ideas and these beautiful things going on, we start questioning ourselves. Well, should I be doing something different? Am I doing it right? Are they right? Would they do a better job than me? And we start questioning ourselves. So I want you to always give yourself credit. If you're the primary caregiver, you're the one that made that commitment. You're the one in the day-to-day. Don't let somebody from outside of that make you question where you're at. Listen, maybe they do know something. You know, maybe they have dealt with somebody and they say, hey, and that's where support groups help too. And I make sure that people in support group don't say, you should try this, but they say, well, you know, when my dad was wondering all the time, we went and bought this, and it really helped us. It's a very personal thing. It's not saying, and therefore you should too. This is something that helped us. That's very different than people telling you how you ought to do it. The other thing I love to do is I tell families, if you're the primary caregiver and another sibling across the country has all the best advice in the world, invite them to come and help. Say, those are great ideas. You know, my husband and I have not left this house in over 2 years because we've been caring for Mom, but those are such great ideas. Why don't you come and stay for a week, and I would love for you to try all of that and see how it works. Do y'all know how many times they say yes? They don't. You're right, they don't. But invite them to come and help them, and if they've got all this great ideas, great. Why don't you come over and help me implement that, right? And then also we talked about learning, and that way you can weigh their advice. There may be some truth to what they say. They truly may have read an article somewhere that has a tip. Like most people don't believe that sleep is one of the best things you can do to prevent Alzheimer's. Most people don't think there's anything that you can do to prevent it. And we can't say prevent, but we can say we can drastically lower our risk with lifestyle changes. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think it's just a done deal, and it's not. You don't necessarily get Alzheimer's just because you get older. That's great news. You can have the genes and still not develop the disease. That's great news. Most people don't know that. So it may be that somebody read an article and they come to you and say, hey, I heard that if you improve your sleep, it can help maybe prevent Alzheimer's, or at least delay or reduce the risk. And you're going to go, sleep? That's ridiculous. It's inevitable. Sometimes they know something, so you be educated so that when somebody comes at you with one of these little snippets of information, you can weigh that against what you know. And also, you can talk to the doctors. Doctors love hearing all the stuff that they don't know, like, 25 boiled eggs prevents Alzheimer's. I'm sure your physician will love that. You may learn to say, have to say I'm sorry a lot. What do I mean by that? Saying I'm sorry does not mean that you've done something wrong or that you've messed up and you need that. It's just acknowledging that didn't quite go the way I wanted it to go. It's just kind of a way to restore that relationship. So things like, I'm sorry, I was just trying to help. I'm sorry I made you angry, hurt your feelings. I'm so sorry I embarrassed you. I'm sorry, this must really be tough. With Alzheimer's disease, sometimes caregivers have to say, I'm really sorry, Mom, I treated you like a child. You're not a child. So we have to do that. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't even here. Sometimes we make decisions and have conversations with a person sitting right in front of us, regardless of what disease it is. We're having conversations about them and they're sitting right there, right? So we make them feel like they're not even there, or they don't have a say in their own care. And then, I'm sorry, this must be really hard. That's a good one. I'm sorry, Mom, as much as I try to understand what you might be going through, I don't. And I'm sorry I said that and it upset you. Okay, and all that does is restore the relationship. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. Be your best advocate. I love this one. You are the expert on your loved one. The doctor is the expert on the disease. So make sure you're keeping notes. If they change a medication and all of a sudden your loved one starts behaving differently or is complaining that they're feeling anxious or jittery or they can't sleep, write that down. Let that doctor know. Guess what? That might not be a side effect for that particular medication, but your doctor is not in your house every day seeing what you see, and if you don't let them know, they can't help you. So especially with medication changes, if you notice something new and different, let them know. And you can be very respectful about that. Hey, we changed this, whatever, ABC medication, and Mom has started waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning every morning. Could that be related? Can we adjust that? Can we tweak that? Because this is a new thing. So be an expert on that. If their behavior drastically changes, that's very important because as we get older, things like urinary tract infections can make us behave very differently. Somebody who does not even have dementia can look like it. You can take them to an emergency room and somebody can automatically make the assumption, and this happened to one of my clients, made the assumption that her mom had dementia. And her mom, what they had done is they had taken her mom's hearing aids and eyeglasses when they were admitting her through the emergency room. So they were trying to get her history. She couldn't hear them, she couldn't see them, she couldn't give them any information. So when the daughter walked in the room, they said, "How long has your mom been diagnosed with dementia?" "What are you talking about? Mom had chest pain. We were watching a movie at home and she didn't feel good," but they automatically made that. So make sure you say important words like sudden onset. Mom was fine yesterday, today she woke up, doesn't know where she's at. That's delirium, and that can be treated and fixed. But if the doctor doesn't know that, if you go to the hospital and this is all they see of her, is that first 10 minutes, that's all they've got to go on. So we've got to advocate. And I don't mean that you're questioning the doctor. I'm just saying you're with your loved one every day. You know what's normal, what's not normal. You know how they react to that. You know that. So advocate for your loved one. Talk to the hospital, talk to the doctor. Take notes. I'm a big fan of keeping journals because when you're in there for your visit that's maybe 15, 20 minutes long, you're going to forget something and you know it. You're driving down the road and like, oh man, I meant to ask about that. So keep a journal from one doctor's visit to the next. And as changes happen or questions come up or things pop in your head, jot them down. Have those with you. Also remember, you do not have to handle this alone. And again, I'm thankful for a place like this, a church that obviously recognizes the challenges of being a caregiver, a church that has a caregiving program, all the support groups I've already mentioned, all of those are ways, and we actually have that as one of our taglines is Alzheimer's disease, a journey you shouldn't take alone. I think it was a journey no one has to take alone because we're here for you. We're here, Knoxville is our home. And we've been around for 40 years, so certainly for that particular disease, reach out. But there are support groups for all other kinds of chronic illnesses as well. I know there are a number of cancer support groups. There are caregivers for us of kidney disease was my other one. There are support groups for that. And sometimes they're just support groups that are mixed. It doesn't matter what is going on with your loved one. You can find a support group and get that support. So please don't feel like you have to handle everything alone because you don't. And we talked about the pastor earlier who said, "I made a vow, I'm not," and then we make promises too all the time. Mom would never want to go into what we call nursing homes now. All the terminology is different, but I would never do that. I promise I'm going to keep her at home. And that sounds really pretty in the moment until it gets to where you can't do it anymore. And then what do? Well, now you're breaking the promise. So don't make the one you can't keep, make the one you can keep. And the words that you can always keep are, "I will do everything in my power to give you the best care and the best quality of life possible." Because what does that open the door to? I can't be awake 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you need more care than I can provide. I'm going to hire an in-home caregiver, like one of your sponsors is Senior Helpers. I'm going to call Senior Helpers and see about getting a caregiver in here to help me with Mom. You're still giving them the best care and the best quality of life, right? So you're keeping that promise. I can't provide everything that Mom or Dad needs to stay in the home safely. I'm going to go look at Morning Point and see about getting them a room there. Are you still keeping that promise? I'm going to do everything in my power to give you the best care and the best quality of life. You are. So that's the promise you can keep. But we all want to make that promise of keeping it home. I mean, grandmas used to put curses on us. Y'all ever have a grandma curse you? You ever put me in a nursing home? I'll come back and haunt you. I had that It's bad. Don't wait, be prepared. This is just a list of things. I know that in your caregiver group you have this, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but it's so important to be prepared in advance and have all this information. You know, when they're asking you what all medications are on, you go start counting bottles and trying to find all the bottles. Keep a medication list, have that handy, keep up with doctor's appointments. I talk about having a notebook, a binder, a medical binder, where you can keep lab work, most current lab work, most current and up-to-date medication list, that place where you write down changes or things that happen from one doctor's appointment to the next. It's important. You've got to know where important documents are: wills, powers of attorney, advance directives. Keep that emergency stuff handy. If your loved one still lives alone and they're having memory issues, arrange for e-bills. You know how many times people are having their electricity turned off, their phone turned off and all that because they've forgotten how to pay the bills, and that's the first sign that a family member finds out something is going on. So there's a stack of bills that weren't paid. We in Knoxville, Tennessee, if it is a diagnosis of dementia, we have a silver alert kit, and you fill that out and it helps you be prepared in the event that your loved one wanders, and 6 out of 10 people will wander at some point. And talk about plans in advance. You know, like I said, I tried to talk to this about with my son, and he thought I was dying, so we're going to have to revisit that. But I want you to know, this is what I want. Should I get sick? This is what I want. These are the arrangements I've made. Here is my life insurance policy. What about passwords? Do y'all know that we do so much online banking now that if you even needed to access your loved one's banking or life insurance accounts, you can't without knowing usernames and passwords? Isn't that crazy where this world has gotten? You can't go to the bank and talk to Banker John, who's been your family banker for the last 40 years and he knows you. It's not the way it works anymore. And if you don't have those passwords, you're not getting into those accounts. And you can get locked out. All right, most of us want to age in place, so to do that, you got to connect with the community. There are lots of community resources to help you. Neighbors and church friends. If you've got a loved one living in their home alone, you might want the local authorities to know they're living there alone, just in case you ever have to call them. They've kind of got a flag on that. There are volunteer visitation programs through the AAAD. Sometimes the sheriff offices do it. Sometimes senior centers will make calls to your loved one every day. Mobile meals. A lot of times people will say, well, I can take her food. She doesn't need mobile meals. Do you know that those mobile meals deliveries people are trained? That when they walk in the house, they're laying eyes on your loved one, and if they notice anything strange going on, or if they knock on the door and the loved one doesn't come, they know to call a family member or they call 911. I went to a house as a social worker to visit somebody one time, and an ambulance pulled in right in front of me, and I'm like, what in the world is going on? And it was the mobile meals person. She had gotten there, and he had fallen and couldn't get to the door. And she followed protocol, and if I hadn't had a visit, I don't know how long he would have laid there. If she hadn't been going, we don't know. Mobile meals are great. It gives you that extra look. Geriatric care managers, those are folks that can help make decisions in your place. This is especially helpful in long-distance caring situations. Hiring in-home care agencies, that's what senior helpers is. Those are folks that you hire to come in and stay with your loved one and give you some additional assistance. There are organizations, if you do start looking for assisted living or memory care, there are businesses that will help you do that. I call them real estate agents for assisted living and memory care, because that's kind of what they do. They'll ask you, what are you looking for? What do you need? What area? And they'll help you find that. Always, always, always discharge planners and social workers. You know, we have so much information. We're the ones that are familiar with the resources in the community. We're the ones that understand insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, all that. So before somebody tells you, oh, we can get this service, and you get all excited, and then somebody like Gabriel, I come to you and go, yeah, no, your insurance doesn't pay for that. You can't get that service. Or they think that, well, I've got that Medicare Advantage, I've got that Blue Cross Blue Shield, it pays for everything. Doesn't pay for in-home care, doesn't pay for assisted living. Know that. Please make sure you talk to somebody and understand. And then elder law attorneys and life care plans. Those are huge things you can do in advance. So that when you get to that point, you've already made all the difficult decisions. You don't have to make difficult decisions in the moment because you sat down and had a conversation way in advance. And now when this time comes, you know that mom said, when it gets to the point where I can't live alone, I don't want to stay with you. You've got children. I want you to live your life. I've got this policy. This is the place I would like to live. And all that is done, and now you're following my wishes. A lot easier. To stay at home, you want to make the home safer, installing ramps, removing throw ropes. Please pick up the throw ropes. I know they're pretty and mama loves them, but please. They're a major tripping hazard. Reducing clutter in the house. Those are tripping hazards. I know somebody that fell and broke a hip because she was walking down the hall, put her hand on a stack of boxes. Of course, it wasn't stable, and as she put her weight on it, down she went. Thinking about furniture, if a rocking chair isn't a walking path, if I'm walking through that path and I go to grab a rocking chair to stabilize me, it's going to give and I'm going to fall. Things like that. In the case of memory loss, we want to think about weapons, chemicals, old medications. medications, the refrigerator. Does somebody look in the refrigerator to make sure the food isn't bad? Because guess what? My sense of smell and my sense of taste have changed, and my sense of judgment when I look at it and see black spots on the cheese, I may not go, oh, that's moldy cheese, I need to throw that away. I'm going to eat it, and then I might get sick, so we need to look at that. Utilizing technology, we have a safety catalog on our website you can get to, and it gives you all kinds of safety things in the house, things from safely getting in and out of the tub and the shower, certain door locks, alarms that you can put on the door, so that all the Wi-Fi stuff is great. You can be in California and know that somebody opened your mom's front door. It's just amazing what we can do with smart technology. And then assessing driving. As we get older, our peripheral vision changes. There are a lot of changes that come on. When we add dementia to that, it becomes a lot more dangerous. But At the Crossroads is a great book you can access. It's put out by the Hartford, and it just helps you assess an older person's driving. So that's a really great thing. But sometimes, despite your best efforts, it may come time that you have to decide about placing someone out in the home. So how do I know it's time? Can you duplicate yourself 8 to 10 times over? Can you make yourself over where that you are 8 people? Because there are about 8 to 10 people. How many would you say interact with a morning point? I'm sorry, I forgot your first name. How many staff do you think interact with a person on a daily basis?
8 to 10.
And that's the number I usually come up with when I ask, about 8 to 10. So you've got 8 to 10 people attending to your loved one's needs, and there's only one of you. So can you duplicate yourself over? Can you learn all the skills needed? Can you become an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a nurse, a cook? And can you get all those skills that they're going to get? Can you be an activity person? Can you come up with enough activities to keep your loved one busy and active and all during the day? Can you stay awake 24 hours a day? That's a big one. Can you absolutely ensure their safety? I know Mom wants to live in the home that she and Dad built, and she's lived there 60 years. I know she wants to live there. I know that it's emotional. But is she safe there? Is she safe with that gas stove? Does she know if somebody comes to the door, is she going to let them in thinking it's the sweet little neighbor boy, but it's really somebody that's going to rob her? It's happened in families I've worked with. They go to the door, they let them in. Because we're from the South. I used to sleep with my door unlocked. How about is it negatively impacting your marriage, your family, or your job? Is your boss telling you, look, I know your mom is sick, but if you cannot keep taking these days off, you can't keep responding every time the phone rings? Is your spouse feeling just overwhelmed and it's really having a negative impact? Have you missed every single solitary ball game your son has played in this season? You know, those are things to think about. And again, that's not being selfish. That's just looking at how is this affecting you. Is your loved one's physical, emotional, psychological, or are there physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual needs being met in their current living situation? If not, is it time to think about moving them somewhere else? And then definitely, if they're falling or wondering, those are big signs that it's time that maybe it's not safe for them to live alone. Now, I hear people talk about, I can't believe you would do that to your mother. I would never do that to my husband. I don't even understand how you could do that to your spouse. So I want you to change one word, because when we're making these decisions, we're not doing something to our loved one, we're really doing what's best for them. So I want you to see emotionally how it feels, changing it from to. How could you do that to your mother? What if we change it to for? I'm going to do this for my mother. I'm doing the very best thing for my mother. I'm glad I can provide this care for my dad, right? And then people talk about, well, I'm just not going to dump my mom off in one of those places. And my question is, and you're laughing, because I'm going to, have you seen these places? I mean, literally, they are like cruise ships on land. This is not what we grew up with thinking a nursing home is. There are activities, there are group things, there are all kinds of things. And the thing about it is, if you're the child or the spouse, and you have someone that go into a community, you get to go back to being the child and spouse. You're not arguing over all those care decisions anymore. They've got in-house medical care, 24-hour care with a fresh staff every 8 hours. You get to worry less. You get to sleep. And you can be you to everyone else. You can go back to being grandma and friend and sister. And the benefits for your loved one, I've already told you the answer to this, but what's the number one predictor of longevity? It's social engagement. It's being around other people. So guess what? When your loved one goes in a community, you're not dumping them off. You're sending them on a permanent vacation. So they've got social interaction, activities. They learn new skills. Their meals are provided, exercise. And then again, they're cared for by non-relatives. So the relative gets to go back to being just the relative. And all of those are good for them. They're good for their physical, emotional, and brain health. So really, it's not dumping your loved one or doing something to them. When you make the decision to move them to a care community, really, in many ways, it's doing something for them and for you. So I like to help folks not feel so guilty. Last thing is, a common question is, we move mom into an assisted living often should I go visit? I don't know why people think I know the answer to this for their family, but well, how often should we go visit? Should we go every day? Should we do this? And here's my answer to that. Well, how often did you visit when mom lived in her own home? Did you go every single day after work? If not, then you're feeling that you need to go every single day. It's probably coming from a place of guilt, because her needs are met. She's being cared for. And what is the purpose of your visit? Is your purpose to make sure that they're doing their job? Is it to make sure that she's okay? Is it to make her feel like you're a good child? You know, what's the purpose of the visit? Really think about that. And are you visiting for her? Are you going just to have a social visit? Or are you going to fulfill some guilt or some need in you? Remember way before that slide we talked about, is it about our loved one or about us? That's what the visiting comes down to. And then daily, grace, mercy, and forgiveness. Nobody is a perfect caregiver, but praise God, tomorrow is a new day. So let go of today, and just tomorrow you get to start all over. It's a great thing about going to sleep and waking up the next day, right? So again, I'm from Alzheimer's, Tennessee. We do have a wonderful office here in Knoxville. It's our home office. Gabe can definitely get you connected with some great folks there. If that is what you're dealing with, please reach out to us. We would love to serve you. And thank you for letting me spend part of your Sunday afternoon with you.
Thank you. Hold that thought, guys. I'm going to try to turn this on. Cheryl, don't go away. I think, is that work? First of all, thank you so much, Cheryl. And I have a couple of those cards that she mentioned about please know that my loved one has dementia if you need that. We have maybe just time for one or two questions, and I'm going to do this, and you can do
I
that.
got this one. All right, awesome. Thank you. Oh, I love answering questions. I was trying to keep to my time.
I just wanted to ask, I heard you say that not everyone gets Alzheimer's.
Right.
Because in my mind, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
That as you get older, everybody's going to get Alzheimer's. And it's a blessing to hear you speak that everyone does not get Alzheimer's.
Thank you. Absolutely not. And I know, again, not a doctor, but there's one sitting here that can address that. Now, Alzheimer's is a disease. Not everybody gets cancer. Not everybody gets diabetes. It's a disease. And what we know is that just because you have the gene, it doesn't mean you will get it. There's a lot you can do for a healthy lifestyle, even if you have that gene. You can do a lot not to flip the switch. So yeah, please don't live in fear, and I love talking to families about that. So if you'd like to talk further, okay, can get you in touch.
One more question.
No, just
As I have a parent who has vascular dementia, his mother did and whatnot, how, like I read things that tell me that there are certain tests anymore that they can do to kind of as predictor. You know, I've heard people, like even in my own family, who said, I have an aunt who actually doesn't even have a doctor. She's like of the opinion she would just rather not know. But, you know, if there are things that you can do, certainly, you know, things that put it off or whatnot, but how soon is too soon, and is that even
at birth. Just how soon is too soon to start putting it off at birth? So what we know about lifestyle, now you mentioned vascular. Vascular is more related to strokes and heart disease and things, so please step in. But I would say protecting your heart. I mean, maintaining a healthy weight, maintaining your blood pressure, anything you can do not to have a cardiovascular incident is going to be one of the better things for vascular. For a couple of the dementias, FTD and early onset Alzheimer's, there's a much stronger genetic link. In those cases, I would say it's probably a good idea to get tested, just because those do have a genetic marker. But for the typical Alzheimer's, the over 65 Alzheimer's, and I don't know what your take is on this, I'd love to hear it, but some experts I work with say don't go get tested, because all you know now is you do carry the gene, but there's so much you can do not to flip that gene on. And so the focus now really is more on lifestyle factors. Exercise, learning a new skill, healthy diet, staying socially engaged, getting enough sleep, managing blood pressure, diabetes, other health conditions, all those things. The more we look at it, it's much more that, yes, somebody in my family had it, but these are all the things I can do to prevent it. Now, can some of us do everything perfectly and still get a disease? Absolutely. It happens to people we know every day. But it's much more, did you attend symposium this year? I did. You did. So it's much more, what we're seeing is it's much more about a healthy lifestyle than that somebody in my family had it for the most part. And so starting out, I teach in high schools about Alzheimer's disease, and that now is the time to start, because you have one brain, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. I love leaving time for questions because it's about hope, and I think that that is one of the things that Cheryl is really good at voicing, is the importance of hope, and that there is hope. And just like Ms. Vanessa said, it's nice to hear that. I'm going to pass this over to Megan.
We're gonna do, we just made an executive decision, and we're gonna do our drawing, as the last speaker, so hold on to your tickets and make sure, I'm gonna have this over here, so if you've not dropped in your ticket, I've got it right over here. But prior to working in assisted living, I did work in hospice for about 5 years as well, so this is near and dear to my heart, palliative care and hospice, so I'm happy to introduce Dr. Cynthia Pearman, who graduated in 1981 from University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and in 1986 from UT College of Medicine in Memphis. She did a residency in family medicine in Greenville, South Carolina, and worked in urgent care, university health, and in faculty teaching positions in South Carolina, North Carolina, and at UT Medical Center. Dr. Pearman is board certified in family medicine and in hospice and palliative medicine. She's practiced palliative care and hospice full-time since 2016. Please help me welcome Dr. Pearman.
I use my hands a lot, so if you could hear me on this one, it's better, because I use my hands a lot.
I think so.
Okay, if you can, I'll do that if you can.
It should, if she.
He's switching over.
He's switching it over.
Okay, go ahead and test that one out.
Let's test that. Is that better? Can you hear me? I'll try to talk plainly. My husband is profoundly hard of hearing, and I talk softly and I mumble, he tells me 100 times a day, so included in that is my husband, my sweet husband of almost 40 years, made the handouts for me because I was having printer ink issues, and pursuant to he doesn't hear well when I mumble, he printed the one that is really, really small and hard to read. So if you would like them to email you the actual copy online, you can read it a whole lot better, I promise. I'm going to talk about hospice and palliative care related to people with chronic and serious life-limiting and life-threatening illness. And this has to do with any chronic medical illness. But I will touch a little bit especially on Alzheimer's and related dementias, just because it has to do with the previous speaker talked about. And a lot of the things having to do with being either a person affected with a chronic serious illness or a caregiver with a chronic serious illness, or an adjacent person who's touched by someone with a chronic serious illness. There's a lot of overlap regardless of what the disease process is. The first thing I'm going to do is give you a little bit of history. Why? This is not a history lesson, but it's important to touch a little bit on the history of hospice and palliative care so that you know why there's such confusion about what is hospice and what is palliative care and what's the overlap between the two. Hospice actually started first, and that's why you've probably heard the word more, and that's why a lot of people think palliative care is worse than hospice, if you will. We have some family members say, well, hospice is okay, but please don't bring in palliative care. We don't want that. And it's like, well, no, it's the opposite, actually. Hospice actually started first, and that's why you know that word. Hospices actually started in the 1200s in France by the Catholic Church, where hospices were houses for anyone who needed help. It could be a traveler, it could be a person making a religious pilgrimage, it could be a person who was sick or wounded or dying, or just frail elders who didn't have anyone to care for them. And these, of course, were volunteer basis, and volunteer and usually church-based. The first medical hospice for persons who were seriously ill or dying was actually in France and was started by a woman named Jean Garnier. I did not take French, I took Latin, so I apologize to her for mispronouncing her name, most likely. Following that, there were other hospices, medical hospices, that spread out into the rest of France and into Ireland and the rest of Great Britain. In 1967, Dame Cicely Saunders who is the mother, if you will, of modern hospice, opened St. Christopher's Hospice in London in 1967. This is still the mecca of all hospices. One of my former co-workers, one of our social workers at my hospice, actually trained at St. Christopher's and worked there for several years. St. Christopher's is the hospice that still does it the way that all of us aspire to do hospice care. It's still the best one in the world. In 1969, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who most of you probably have heard of, published her landmark book on death and dying, describing the 5 stages of emotions. She was writing more in terms of persons with a life-threatening illness, or persons who are actually terminal with an illness, but the 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Those 5 stages really apply to any person experiencing grief and loss. In 1972, Dr. Kubler-Ross began to work to try to bring hospice as an actual medical entity that was paid for by third-party payers in this country. She started talking to congressional people beginning in the early 70s. She first testified to the Senate beginning in 1972. The first medical hospice in this country was opened in 1974 in Connecticut Hospice, which is still in operation today, as I understand. The first hospice legislation was introduced in this country to get hospice paid for by Medicare, specifically in 1974. It did not pass in 1974. In 1978, the National Hospice Organization started. It is still in operation, but now it's called the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, and it's still very, very active throughout the country. In 1979, the federal government, and Medicare specifically, first started some kind of trial programs throughout the country to explore this idea of hospice and see, obviously, what is the government interested in? Is it going to save us money? And so they started trial programs in some states to see if hospice was actually something that would be medically feasible, financially sustainable. In 1981, and this is important, the first AIDS case, it wasn't called AIDS then, but the first AIDS case was identified in the U.S. in 1981. Why is that important? Why is AIDS important? Because some of the first hospices in the world, specifically in Great Britain, in London, were open, hospice houses were open for AIDS patients. And why? Because many of them had no one else to care for them. They had been estranged from their families or disowned by their families. Their significant others may have already died or may have been afraid to care for them. People who still loved them may have been just afraid to care for them. Hospitals were afraid to care for them. In 1981 was the year I graduated from med school. We didn't start hearing, I remember hearing about HTLV3 was what the virus was called at that time in my second year of med school, which would have been 1982, 83. And I remember actually seeing patients with it. It wasn't called AIDS yet, but medical people were very afraid of it. And I actually had one classmate who got it from in an emergency room situation in Memphis, and did die later. In 1982, Congress created the first Medicare hospice benefits. 1982 is when Medicare started paying for hospice as a paid-for entity, which was a double-edged sword. It was good, and it was good, but it caused some limitations. Once the government starts paying for it, then they start putting stipulations on what you're allowed to do, of course. Palliative care came along a little bit differently, and why is that? Well, who used to do palliative care before medicine got so subspecialized and compartmentalized like it did now? Palliative care, which is the supportive, warm and fuzzy, low-tech, high-touch part of care. Palliative care in the past was done by people like me, primary care doctors, and we just did it as part of our regular care. Back in the dark ages, when I was growing up and when I was still in med school, when I was still in residency, when we still made rounds at the hospital in the morning, went to the clinic to see our patients, went back and made some more rounds at lunchtime, went back to the clinic, and then we went back and made some more rounds before we left for the day. And then somebody was on call that night, and we still cared for our patients on call and on the weekends, and maybe delivered some of their babies too. And if they went to the nursing home, we followed them at the nursing home. But if they needed to be seen at home, we saw them at home. Back when family doctors or internal medicine doctors still did all that stuff, they were the ones doing the palliative care. We know now that that model of medicine, good, bad, or otherwise, is going by the wayside, although it's starting to come back a little bit. But we know now that you tend to see your primary care doctor and your specialist in the office. They might or might not be on call after hours. More often than not now, I know when I call a doctor's office to talk to one of the providers, I get, if you're having a medical emergency, call 911, the office is closed now. And then I say some words, and then I hang up the phone, and I try to figure out how to do their cell phone number or not. We know that that unfortunately is the model now. And it's not because those providers aren't working hard, they are working hard, but it's just different now. We know that hospital care now is provided by hospitalists who are very good at getting things done very efficiently in the hospital and getting the right tests at the right time and getting the answers and getting the right attention for you in the hospital. But they haven't known you for 20 years like your primary care doctor, or they haven't been caring for your cancer journey for 7 years like your oncologist. They're the hospitalist. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes fresh eyes on a situation can be a good thing, but they may not know what's important to you and what matters to you and all the interesting dynamics of your families, and so this is how palliative care came to be. As medicine has become so high-tech and low-touch and so compartmentalized, this is why palliative care came about as a specialty. Dr. Balfour, who is a Canadian physician, coined the term palliative care. Palliative comes from the Latin word which means to cloak or to cover, because palliative care is the branch of medicine that covers you or protects you or supports you. Like I call it a safety net. Instead of a cloak, I call it a safety net or an umbrella. The first terminal care unit, and that doesn't sound very good, does it? That sounds scary. The first terminal care unit was opened at a large Winnipeg hospital in 1974. In 1987, the Cleveland Clinic Cancer Center opened their first palliative medicine service that saw patients in the cancer center as outpatient and also in the hospital. And they also became the first palliative care center that pushed a lot of the early teaching and research in palliative care. And there's still, of course, Cleveland Clinic is still a mecca for excellent care for many, many disease processes, and they still are one of the very best centers for palliative care where a lot of the good research comes from. Currently, over 90% of U.S. hospitals over 300 beds have palliative care, special palliative care specialists available. Unfortunately, only about 17%, and this is current data, only about 17% of smaller rural hospitals have palliative care available. So you have to go to a bigger center, like at least the size of Methodist, Park West, Fort Sanders, UT. Tenova doesn't have one yet, but they're getting one. They're working on getting a palliative care service. Palliative care, think of palliative care as parallel care. Palliative care is not done instead of the rest of your medical care. It's done in parallel in addition to your other medical care. Palliative care is interdisciplinary care that aims to relieve your suffering, improve your quality of life, help you function better, whatever function is important to you, helps you with decision making for patients and their families. And just like with in OB, there are 2 patients involved, or at least. In palliative care, the designated patient is the patient, but it's really everybody in that patient's inner circle of who's supporting them. It's offered simultaneously with all other care. Palliative care is for helping control symptoms at any stage and for practical assistance at any point of a serious life-threatening or life-limiting illness, not just at the very end of it like we think of hospice care being. Hospice care, and this is where I like to use the umbrella terminology. Think of palliative care being the umbrella that kind of supports you when you're caught in this horrible storm of a life-threatening, life-limiting illness. Palliative care tries to cover you and help support you. It can't stop the storm. That's up to the oncologist or whoever, but it can help support you. Hospice is that part of the umbrella that you give to the frailest one in whoever's with you. If you've got one of those big golf umbrellas, think of palliative care like a golf umbrella. Hospice is the part at the very middle where you want to be if it's raining really bad. Hospice gives you the most support when you're closer to the end of your life. So where is palliative care done? First of all, Palliative care can be done in the hospital if you're in a bigger hospital that has embedded palliative care. If you're in a hospital that's very attuned to palliative care, which most of the big hospitals in our area thankfully are, and oftentimes the palliative care consult will be initiated sometimes automatically with certain diagnoses, sometimes in the emergency department, sometimes by the hospitalist, sometimes by your specialist, sometimes by the nurse on the floor. But if there's palliative care available in the hospital, you can ask for it. When my mother-in-law was not doing well a year ago, my husband had to ask for palliative care because the providers in this other state hospital didn't think of it. And I told my husband to tell them to ask for it. With serious chronic illness, the palliative care specialist can come into the hospital to help with symptom control and help have some of those lengthy discussions, especially when you're having to make a lot of hard decisions where time is really of the essence because you're in the hospital. The palliative care specialists know how to kind of cut to the chase and figure out what does this person really want, or if they can no longer speak for themselves, what would they want if they could still speak for themselves? Who are the decision makers? Who needs to be helping make the decisions for this person if they can't speak for themselves? Do they have all those documents filled out that hopefully people do have filled out, but most of the time they don't have filled out? And if they don't have all those advanced care planning documents filled out, how can we get the answers to those? And time is of the essence, by the way. The hospitalists and the specialists in the hospital are trying to deal with so many other medical decision making that sometimes they don't have the time. Unfortunately, and it's just the way medicine is now, they don't have the time to sit down and have some of those hard, detailed conversations, which is like, what did this person ever tell you they would want if they got into this sort of situation? Did they ever tell you who they would want to make decisions for them? Did they ever even talk about this? Did y'all ever talk about this? What was important to them? Okay, maybe they never talked about what they would want, so help me know what was important to them. If they are no longer able to recognize their family, if they're no longer able to watch the football game, if they're no longer able to, I don't know, what's important to them so we know how, because that factors into some of this decision making. Palliative care can be done in the office, and this is what was done by many primary care providers over the years, and sometimes it was only done by primary care providers, but now it can be done by specialists. Many cancer centers, large cancer centers like UT, Thompson, Tennessee Cancer may have palliative care providers in the office that you will automatically be referred to, or at least offered to be referred to, if you have very advanced cancer, stage 3, stage 4, or a cancer that is known to progress very quickly and is very serious. Especially if you go to a large referral cancer center, if you go to Cleveland Clinic, if you go to Mayo, if you go to Emory, and you have or if you go to the Duke Brain Tumor Clinic, there's a very good chance if you have an advanced cancer, they're going to have palliative care see you at Vanderbilt. If you go to Vanderbilt, there's a very good chance palliative care is going to see you, and Vanderbilt has excellent palliative care. Many of the heart centers here, especially if you go to a heart failure center, such as at Vanderbilt or at UT or any place else that has a heart failure center, there's a good chance you're going to be referred to palliative care. You want this. You want this. This is something you want. It's something not to be afraid of. And remember, it's parallel. It's not instead of. It's in addition to the other care you're getting. Palliative care, to a more limited basis, can be done at home. It's not widely available in the home yet. And why is that? A palliative care provider who goes out into the home can usually only see maybe 3 or 4 new patients a day. They can see maybe 5 or 6 follow-up patients a day because they're having to drive to them and they're still having to do all their documentation after. So we are not the group that I work for is not the only one that does home palliative care. Some of the Medicare Advantage programs have their own embedded palliative care that they can refer people to for home. Some of that is done by telehealth. That's fine if you're able to do telehealth visits. But palliative care is not available to every insurance program. Unfortunately, it's only beginning to be covered by insurance. Hopefully 20 years from now when I need it, hopefully it won't be that long, hopefully 20 years from now when I need it, it will be better supported by insurance. But when I say palliative care can't do something at this point, it's usually because insurance doesn't quite cover it yet. But it's getting there. It's better than it was even 10 years ago. When are sometimes that palliative care might be a benefit to you or a loved one? When a recent illness or hospital stay has caused a big change in someone's condition, a big decline, when they are in the ditch medically, and it looks like they're not going to pull all the way out of the ditch back to where they were before. When they've gotten into that revolving door of the hospital in the ER, when they're falling all the time, when they're getting a urinary tract infection all the time, when they're getting a respiratory infection all the time, when they can't swallow, when they're losing weight, when they're getting wounds, and they're just in that revolving, you know what I mean by the revolving door because you've seen it in someone that you cared about. When they've gotten in that revolving door and every time they go into a medical ditch, they never quite get all the way out. That's when palliative care might be of help. When there are big decisions that they or you or whoever's in their circle need help with, whether or not it's to go into a care home, whether or not it's to stop driving, whether or not it's to get extra help into the home, whether or not it's to maybe get a feeding tube, that's a big decision, but something that comes up with the dementia processes. You know, any of those big decisions, whether or not it's to stop chemo, whether or not it's to even do chemo, when you need help, and it's not that the palliative care provider is going to tell them the answers or tell you the answers, they're going to help you. It's sort of like going to a good therapist, but a little bit more medical in that they're going to help you process and figure out what the answer is. And when the quality of life for that person is continuing to get worse, despite getting the very best of the medical care that they can possibly have available to them. So who does palliative care? Physicians of any specialty can do palliative care. Palliative care providers tend to be primary care. They could be family medicine. They could be internal medicine. They might also be emergency doctors. They might also have started as oncologists, or frequently as oncologists. They might have started as anesthesiologists. They can be anything. They can be surgeons. They can be OBGYNs. They may or may not be board certified in hospice and palliative medicine. Hospice and palliative medicine has only been a medical specialty that you could actually get a board certification for since 2008. I was board certified in 2008, the first year you could be board certified, and mine is attached onto my family medicine, which I've had since 1989. But you don't have to be board certified in palliative care and hospice care to be good at it. It just means you've had some extra special training. If you work in a cancer center, if that provider works in a cancer center or a heart center, someplace like a Vanderbilt or a Cleveland Clinic, chances are they're going to be board certified because they will only hire them that way. I had to get my current job, I had to be board certified. But just because they're not doesn't mean they're not equipped to do the job. Maybe they've just been doing this already a long time. Nurse practitioners, as with much of home-based care, nurse practitioners or advanced practice nurses tend to do a bulk of home visits and even some of the hospital visits. And many of them also can be specially board certified in palliative and hospice care. Because palliative care, like hospice, because it's modeled after hospice for the most part, also involves chaplains. When you're talking about a chaplain in hospice and palliative care, it doesn't have to be religious. It's a chaplain. It's spiritual but not religious. So if the person has a religious or a faith background, then the chaplains are taught to gear the way they talk to that person's faith background or belief system, but it doesn't have to be. We serve a wide, on the hospice side we serve about 14 counties, and on the palliative care side we serve about, I can't keep track, maybe 17 counties. So we have some people who are Native American, and their religion might be nature. So our chaplains are taught how to minister to someone whose religion might be nature, rather than a faith system that all of us might be more accustomed to. That's okay. We don't care. One of the principles of hospice and palliative medicine is we don't care what your background is. We don't care. We love everyone the same, and we will try to meet everyone where they are the same. And then depending on the palliative care service and what's available, they may or may not also include social workers. They may or may not also include nurses, regular nurses, not nurse practitioners. They may also include other therapists such as music therapists or art therapists. If it's a child or pediatric or adolescent service, they're probably going to involve some extra therapy, like play therapists, art therapists, music therapists. Palliative care, and I mentioned some of this, palliative care can be done in a hospital if it's a bigger hospital, actually in emergency departments. One of the big hospitals here, oftentimes if someone has had a major event and it's identified in the emergency department that they need a palliative care consult before a big before a big fork in the road has to be decided, they will get palliative care to come to the emergency department and help the family sort out, do you want this person on the ventilator? Do you want them to have surgery? Do you, sometimes that's very important, because sometimes, I know my mother died very suddenly. She never wanted to be on life support. When my father had to call 911 in the middle of the night, God love his heart, he didn't call any of us, he just called 911, and they intubated her. By the time I got there, she was already intubated on the ventilator, and it was a dire situation, and I had to tell them, and it's hard, because everyone looks at you like you're saying, I would like you to just, euthanize my mother. I had to say, my mother never wanted this. She made it very clear to us that she didn't want life support. She would not want, if this is not something she's going to be able to pull out of, she's not going to want this. It's a whole lot easier not to do that stuff up front than to have to undo it. And even though they knew I was a physician, the looks I got from a couple of people when I said, because I got there after the fact, my mother never wanted to be on life support, she would not want this. I can give you all kinds of discussion why she came to that decision, but she wouldn't want this. And then you're doubting yourself, am I doing the right thing? I remember clear as day standing in the medical ICU at UT, looking out the window at cows, thinking, I know she always told me this, but am I doing the right thing? Am I committing some mortal sin by telling them that she doesn't want to be on this ventilator? And yet I knew I was doing the right thing, because she had told me repeatedly, I don't want this. I don't want these things. So even if you never commit those things to paper, which I wish you would, please talk to your loved ones about what your wishes are. I would rather you commit them to paper. Many others in this room would rather you commit them to paper, but at least talk to your loved ones about what you want. Do it now. Do it at Thanksgiving. I'm serious. I'm absolutely dead serious. Sorry, no pun intended. Do it at Thanksgiving. That's a great time. You've got everybody there. Everybody's serotonin levels are up. They've had turkey and pumpkin pie. I'm gonna get to that in a minute. You can do palliative care in assisted livings if you have someone to come in. You cannot do palliative care in nursing homes, and why is that? Okay, so when I talk in a minute about this, a whole sheet about what palliative care cannot do, it's going to be a call and response, like in the sanctuary, where when I say palliative care can't do this, and the response is because insurance doesn't pay for it. Insurance doesn't pay for palliative care providers to come into the nursing home because they expect the nursing home physicians and nurse practitioners to do the palliative care there. Maybe that will change, but that's the way it is right now. So what does palliative care do exactly? They help with symptom control, pain, breathing, appetite changes, weight changes, making sure people are eating and comfortable. It can help with sleep problems, can help with practical issues, helping people to find equipment, helping people to find caregivers, helping people decide when it's time to get caregivers, helping people decide when it's time to start looking at maybe not living at home alone where you have no one else to help you out. Sometimes that's a very long, drawn-out discussion, but necessary. They can help people with some very basic paperwork, and most importantly, they can help them know where to find help to get more complicated paperwork, like estates and trusts, estate settlement and trusts and wills and that sort of thing. They can see what the person already has, and if they don't have anything, then the social worker can at least help them know what needs to be done first, what's urgent right now, and where they can go get help to get these things done. They can just help learn about that person and know what their values are and what their goals are and what's important to them, to help them with their decision making later on. And they can help identify if there are spiritual concerns. One of the things that my boss who hired me talks about, and this pertains to hospice, but really palliative care too. Her name is Janet Weaver, and she's been a hospice nurse for many years, and Janet says that the job of the doctors and nurses in hospice is to get that person comfortable enough that they can then check off their spiritual checkbox. That the real work of hospice is checking off your spiritual and emotional checkbox. And that the doctors and nurses are just peripheral. We're just there to get the person comfortable enough that they can deal with their family issues and having some quality time and getting their spiritual and emotional boxes checked off. And the longer I do this, the more I realize that she's really right. It's not about the medical part. My job is just to get people comfortable so that they can enjoy what time they've got left and check off some of those boxes. What can palliative care not do? This is the call and response part. They cannot, and this is commonly misunderstood, they cannot pay for home health aides, although people wish we can. You get the home health aides in hospice, but not in palliative care, because insurance won't pay for it. They cannot pay for equipment, but they can help you figure out, because insurance won't pay for it, but they can help you figure out what you need and help you figure out how to get your primary care provider or one of your other providers to get that stuff ordered. They can, because they're coming into your home, sometimes they can help figure out what you need. They cannot pay for medicines and disposable supplies like bed pads and briefs, but if you have trouble paying for those things, they can help you figure out where to get them. They cannot pay for regular nurse visits like hospice does, with some rare exceptions. They cannot serve as your primary care physician, and again, because palliative care is parallel care, not instead of care. But if that person is no longer able to get out to a primary care physician and they've stopped going to their specialist, sometimes they can help them find an in-home primary care provider, which they do exist. People don't come into the house to do primary care visits, although there are not enough of them. So if that person is just not able to get out anymore, sometimes they can help them find someone, sometimes the palliative care person, because we know who makes home visits, we can sometimes help them find in-home providers. They do not, as a rule, provide 24 hours coverage. That goes, again, because insurance won't pay for it with all of these. They do not provide 24 hours emergency coverage, but they can help the person find someone that can be available to them 24 hours if their current primary care person or specialist doesn't have 24-hour coverage and they want to keep them out of the emergency room. And again, because insurance, palliative care providers can't see people in skilled facilities, rehab, nursing home, because insurance doesn't pay for it. They, in the eyes of Medicare and Medicaid, really Medicare and the other insurances, it's the nursing home physician and nurse practitioner's job to do that care in the nursing home. Maybe that will change. So when is it time for hospice? Hospice is the big scary word. There's some scary words when I walk into a house or a hospital room. There's some scary words that sometimes we have to dance around, and I don't like to lie to people, but I will tell creative versions of the truth if it's scary to people. Hospice is a scary word. Morphine is a scary word. Palliative care can be a scary word. Cancer can be a scary word. And sometimes depending on the person's background and where they're from and their cultural system, their religious faith background, sometimes you have to know which words you have to be really careful with. But I'm just going to talk about it plainly here. When is it time for hospice? It's time to think about hospice when the burdens of aggressive medical care begin to outweigh the benefits of aggressive medical care. When pain or other symptoms, whether it's nausea, shortness of breath, wounds, what have you, are becoming harder and harder and harder to control. When the office visits for problems, emergency department visits, hospital visits are getting to be more and more and more common, and they're no longer getting helpful. The person's never getting, they're in the ditch all the time, and they're just never really getting out of the ditch, and they're in that revolving door. Medically, when I sign someone up for hospice as a physician, I have to write a little love note to Medicare or Blue Cross or whoever it is, saying that in my professional opinion, this has to be done by the physician, can't be done by anything else. So I have good job security. I have to say in my professional opinion that if this disease follows its expected course, the person is most likely going to die in 6 months or less. And then I have to re-sign that in 3 months, and another 3 months, and then every 2 months for as long as we have them. Now, can you have someone on hospice longer than 6 months? You can. And why is that? The dirty little secret of hospice, there's a couple of dirty little secrets. The first dirty little secret is, with some conditions, excluding most cancers, with some conditions, you actually live longer on hospice than if you didn't have hospice. Why is that? Because you got all this help. You've got people coming in to make sure you're eating, and your pain's controlled, and you're sleeping, and nobody's fighting in the room around you, and you've got all the help you need, you've got the equipment you need. No kidding, people do a little bit better if they're getting all the support they need. End-stage heart failure is one of the conditions that we know that people with end-stage heart failure, where your heart's not pumping well, people are known to live a little bit longer on hospice overall, on average, than if they didn't have hospice. And even some of the cancers now. There's some very good evidence that shows that people who get early palliative intervention in cancer centers with advanced cancer actually live longer and do better than if they didn't get palliative intervention. Duh, because somebody's making, the palliative care specialist at the cancer center is making sure that their pain's controlled and their nausea is controlled and they're eating and they're sleeping and their needs are met and they're not, whatever they're worrying about, they're getting some help with. Now, one of the other little secrets is, no matter how experienced we are, and sometimes even more experienced physicians are less good about establishing prognosis, it's very hard to know when someone will die. And you can say a lot of things like, well, only God knows when we're going to die. And that's really not too far from the truth, because with the exception of some of the bad cancers, it's very hard to predict prognosis, especially with the dementias. You can get in a ballpark, but it's very hard to predict prognosis because everybody's different, and especially in East Tennessee, do you know anyone of an older age? I'm 64. By the time you get to my age in East Tennessee, do you have one diagnosis? No. You have a bouquet of diagnoses, just like you have a basket of medicines. So it's the whole picture of all your diagnoses and medical problems and everything that's happened to you in your life up to that point that helps determine when you're going to die. Interestingly enough, a physician who has cared for you for 30 years is less likely to predict your death accurately than a physician who has only recently met you and is more recently out of school. Think about that. I'm going to say it again. A physician who has known you for 20 or 30 years and has cared for you for that amount of time and is probably close to your age, therefore, is less likely to be able to accurately predict the timing of your death than a younger physician more recently out of school. Why is that? Because they see their own mortality staring them in the face. Because it's hard for them to have those hard conversations with you because they've been seeing you for a long time and they really care about you. They really care about you in that agape love kind of way. And it's hard for them to have those conversations. And because that physician, if they're close to your own age, by the time you get to my age in your 60s, that physician or that care provider has a certain amount of denial about their own medical issues and their own youth, if you will. And so it gets much harder to predict. So when some young whippersnapper that you've only been seeing, fairly recently in the cancer center gives you some hard information about a prognosis, it hurts and it doesn't feel good, but it doesn't mean that they're wrong and that they necessarily know less than your doctor who's been taking care of you for 30 years. They may just have, sometimes fresh eyes can have a better insight, so you have to take all of it and weigh it in your heart. There are suggested criteria for most disease processes that I go by when I'm trying to decide if someone's appropriate for hospice. There are suggested criteria for most disease processes, whether it's a cancer or ALS or Alzheimer's or whatever. There are suggested criteria. But again, most people in East Tennessee and really anywhere in the country don't have just one diagnosis, they have a basket of diagnoses, so you have to take all of that into account. And interestingly enough, one of the best predictors for knowing if someone is appropriate, certainly for palliative care and even for hospice or not, is what's called the surprise question. So we teach the medical students and the residences. If you walk into an encounter with a patient, whether it's in the ER, in the hospital room or the office, if you walk into an encounter with a patient, ask yourself the question, would I be surprised if this patient died in 6 months? Or would I be surprised if this patient died in a year? And if your answer immediately or quickly is, oh no, I would not be surprised if this person dies in 6 months, they're probably appropriate for hospice. If your immediate answer to yourself is, no, I would not be surprised if they died in a year or two, they're probably appropriate for palliative care, maybe hospice. Choosing hospice and palliative care does not speed up the dying process. And we have to reassure families and patients of this over and over and over again. It doesn't speed it up. And anything with some conditions, it actually buys you a little time, and it certainly buys you better quality time. But that's what if I don't buy you some better quality time, whether I buy you more time or not, if I don't buy you better quality time, then I have failed to do my job as well as I hope. Sometimes my team does everything the best they can, and there are just so many problems, there's so many fires to put out, we can't quite, achieve all the things we want to achieve. But if I don't at least make some things a little bit better and take some of the burden off the plate, then I haven't done my job as well as I want to. Here's some guidelines, and some of these next ones have to do, yes ma'am?
I have a question about, if you go back to the previous, can you make it go back to that screen?
Yes.
Okay, so it says they can be recertified after 6 months, and as long as they continue to meet the criteria. And you said something earlier about then it may be 3 months or 2 months or something. My question is, like, what criteria exactly is that? And are they likely at some point to say, okay, 3.5 years ago you said they're about to die, and we're
So
not showing.
the longer we've had someone in hospice, and occasionally, especially with the dementias, occasionally we will have someone even as long as a couple of years, usually not longer than that, because by the time we've had someone for a couple of years, if it's Medicare, the auditors are starting to look at it. They fall into the category of what's called long length of stay. By the time we've had them on service for a couple of years, the auditors from the federal government come in and they start to look at the charts, and then I have to get on the telephone with some judge in Washington, D.C., and we have to go through the patient's chart, and I have to explain, no, I have been to see this patient myself. It always helps that I usually have seen the patient myself. I've seen this patient myself. This is what I find. This is what the nurse finds. The only reason this person is staying alive is because their significant other provides unbelievably tender, loving care, or because their care facility provides unbelievably tender, loving care and makes sure that they're eating and they're sleeping and they're peeing and they're pooping and doing all the things. And we don't know why they've lived this long, but every time I go see this person, they get a little bit worse, and I can't believe they're still there the next time. So by the time we've had them for a couple of years, we really have to document really, really hard to show that they are still continuing to be appropriate. But it's known, and it's even Medicare and the insurance payers know that with some of these, especially the neurodegenerative diseases, can be very hard to predict. So they know that some people are going to live longer. The average for our agency, the average length of stay is about 100 days. It's just a hair over 100 days. In the hospice world, we consider the sweet spot of how long we'd like to have someone is we like to have them on service at least 3 months. Some people we only have for hours. That's fine. We'd rather have them longer. We consider about 3 months to be the sweet spot where we can really get in there and do some help and help with the family and caregivers. But some people we have longer, and we just keep recertifying them as long as they continue to be appropriate. Sometimes people manage to pull out of a ditch. Maybe we've gotten them after they've had some big medical hiccup and been in the ditch, and sometimes they get a little bit better, and we graduate them off and we hand them back. We love nothing better than to graduate somebody off because they have managed to pull out of the ditch and they can go back and resume physical and occupational therapy or try to resume some palliative chemotherapy. Well, we love that. We love feeling like we've gotten somebody feeling better enough that they can go on about their life, and we say, hey, call us if you need us. False alarm. You're doing better than expected. And that does happen sometimes. Criteria for knowing when it's time, and some of the next things I'll say pertain more to the neurodegenerative diseases, but still really anything. Frequent ER and hospital visits, like I said, frequent episodes of pneumonia and sepsis, urinary tract infections, weight loss, dehydration because of decreased intake, problems swallowing, choking, coughing, leading to dehydration, leading to wounds, leading to aspiration pneumonia, leading to UTIs, wounds and skin breakdown. These are some of the things, especially we see with strokes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, neurodegenerative diseases, but really can be with any disease process or bouquet of disease processes. And some of these things pertain specifically to the neurodegenerative diseases and the dementias. When people reach the point where they're unable to sit up in a chair or a wheelchair unsupported, when they're sliding out of chairs or falling out of chairs because they can't sit in a chair for any length of time, when they're no longer able to walk with a walker, even with human assistance, or they have to use a wheelchair to get around, when they no longer can smile interactively, when their speech is limited to 6 or less meaningful words a day, and this is when that what we call the FAST scale for Alzheimer's, that applies just to Alzheimer's, but we kind of use it on the others a little. This is when you get down in the 7s. Basically, you're ready for hospice when you get down in the 7s on that FAST scale. When they're incontinent of bowel and bladder, that doesn't mean somebody's toileting them every 90 minutes and they happen to catch them. That means when they can still verbalize that they need to go, and maybe they're not able to take themselves, but at least they can voice their needs that they need to go, and they're able to make it there most of the time. That's continence. Incontinence is when they can't voice their needs, and it doesn't count if somebody's just passively toileting them every 90 minutes or 2 hours. And they may be, with a neurodegenerative disease, they may be appropriate for hospice earlier if they have a whole bunch of other medical problems that overlay it, which almost invariably around here they do. So where can hospice be done? In the person's own home. We like to keep people in the most home-like environment possible, but of course home is not always possible. I knew from doing primary care, but I didn't really know until I was going out to visit people in their home. Well, I knew just from being a church elder how many people are home alone, but it wasn't until I got this job the last 7 years, and I'm really going out and visiting ill people in their home, how many people are home alone. Alone. I mean alone. Where the only person they see is the mail carrier and maybe the mobile meals, and us, and their families out of state. It's terrifying. And sometimes it's very hard to get them help, either because they're resistant to it or financial reasons or all of that. It's really terrifying. Hospice can be done in the home of a family member if everybody's agreeable to that. It can be done in assisted living. If they're already in the assisted living, if they qualify physically to be in the assisted living and then they develop a hospice-worthy condition, most assisted livings will allow them to age in place where they can stay in the assisted living on hospice, even though they might come down to a place where they physically wouldn't qualify, but they have to already be in the assisted living. Different assisted livings interpret the rules variably. You know, there's that magic rule that you have to be able to get out under your own steam in 13 minutes. We know that the hospice patients, most of them cannot get out under their own steam, or have to get out under your own steam or with a little assistance in 13 minutes, because that's what the fire chiefs say. We know that most hospice patients are not going to be able to do that, but most assisted livings will allow that person to age in place, because we know the most disruptive thing to someone who has now a terminal condition is to have to be uprooted and moved to a new location. That's terrible for anyone who's near the end of their life, but especially if you're very near the end of your life. Hospice can be done in most nursing homes. Nursing homes will usually be contracted maybe with every hospice in the area, or they may only be contracted with 1 or 2 hospices in the area. So depending on the facility, they may not. They have to be contracted with whichever hospice they're using. You cannot get hospice the same time you're getting skilled care, which is not regular nursing home care. Skilled care means like you're getting rehab, physical therapy, occupational therapy, like you get when you just come out of the hospital. So if you're getting that skilled care like you get right out of the hospital on your Medicare days, and why is that? That's because hospice is paid for out of Medicare Part A, the hospital part, so you can't get skilled nursing home care, PTOT, ST, the same time you're getting hospice, because it both comes out of your Medicare Part A, the hospital part, not Part B. Hospice can be done in a dedicated hospice facility. Knoxville used to have one that was owned by St. Mary's, but it was used by everyone, and then St. Mary's sold out, and then they sold out, and then they closed it, and now we don't have one, and we're very sad about it. And we pray every night that someone would open another one that we all could use. There is a little freestanding, volunteer-based nonprofit. It's not licensed, called Sacred Ground. It's up in Halls. It's absolutely lovely. They're absolutely wonderful, but they're not a licensed facility, so they don't have an RN there 24 hours a day like a hospice, like a licensed hospice facility would have, like the St. Mary's one used to have. But it's still a lovely little facility, and it fills in the gaps for a lot of people. And hospice can be done at the hospital. We don't like to do it at the hospital. So out of 400 plus patients at any given point, we only have 1 or 2 people in the hospital, and they usually were not our patients to begin with for our hospice. And most of the other hospices in the area do it the same way. Usually if we have a hospice patient in the hospital, it's someone who needed hospice care in the hospital, like they were taken off the ventilator because it was known they were not going to survive and they're too unstable to go anywhere else, but they need hospice care like right then, right now. Otherwise, we don't like to have a hospice patient in the hospital. That's not the best place to spend the last bit of your life, but sometimes that's the only choice we have, to get the person the care that they need. So who's on the hospice team? There has to be a physician to write these love notes to Medicare and to help with a lot of the medical decision making. They can be board certified in hospice without being board certified in the palliative care, or they don't have to be. It may just be someone who has done some primary care or other specialty for a long time and they just really like doing hospice care and they're really experienced. They don't have to be board certified. Increasingly they are. Nurse practitioners and advanced practice nurses do a lot of the recertifying visits, the doctor visits, if you will. The majority, the bulk of the daily or weekly visits are done by registered nurses. And then there's a host of support staff, LPNs who help out, home health aides, which is paid for when you're on hospice to help with bathing and dressing and linen changes and personal care, chaplains, religious or non-religious, it doesn't matter, very important. We almost always try to get them in there. Social workers to help out with the paperwork and helping people figure out with things that they can't help with, helping people figure out where to go get help with the things that they can't directly help with. And then a requirement of hospice is bereavement staff. We have bereavement, sometimes we call them other names, we call them grief counselors, we find creative things to call them, but it's the same thing. They go in even before the person dies to help the family coping with grief, especially if it's someone who's, if it's a younger patient or there are children in the home or they've had a very rapid disease progression or there's a lot of family drama and there's a lot of grief because there's been a lot of other loss, or I don't know. Sometimes we get them in ahead of time and we call them grief counselors. Either way, they're required per Medicare and the other insurances. They have to follow the family for 13 months. They may call every month for 13 months and the family may say, no, I'm fine, I don't need you, but they're still going to call every month for 13 months and they're going to try to go make a visit. And some families are very welcoming. They also have support groups, and if there's a particular need for that family, then we'll get them lined up with the appropriate support group, appropriate to their disease process and their age and whatnot. And then we have a host of office staff. So for 400 plus patients, we have about 130 employees to take care of about 400 patients. It's a whole village. So what's covered on hospice? Medications, if it's anything related to the disease process we have them for, or anything related to their prognosis, or anything related to their symptom control, which means basically we cover most medications that are reasonable. If it's something really is probably not helping anymore and it's absurdly expensive with too many dollar signs out there and we feel like it's not helping anymore, we're going to talk to the patient and the family about this is not something that we're allowed to pay for, and it's probably not helping you anymore anyway. Let's see if we can figure out a substitute for this. We carry for most of the disposable supplies. They're going to be reused. We get the equipment in the home, usually rental, or some things we have to buy. We can't pay for those fancy $80,000 electric wheelchairs like some maybe ALS patients have, but usually they already have those. One little perk that's not known is hospice pays for up to 5 days in respite, which we really encourage families to use if it's maybe a single caregiver that doesn't have a lot of extra help. We pay for the person to go into respite stay in a good facility up to 5 days every 30 days. And some families, God love them, use their 5 days every 30 days like clockwork, and that is great because they need that. Some families we have to beg and plead and get down on our knees, please let us set you up for respite because you are exhausted, and if you get sick, then we have a problem on our hands. And some people only use it if they break their ankle or they have to go to a wedding or something like that, but it's there. Also, we have 24-hour, 24/7, 365 on-call emergency where a real human being answers 24 hours a day, and if they can't solve your problem easily over the phone, they send the nurse out. And at any given point, there are multiple nurses on call because we cover such a big area. What's not covered, and this is because hospice comes out of in Medicare A, if you're Medicare, or the part of your medical insurance that pays for medical stuff but not room and board, hospice doesn't pay for room and board, so they won't pay for your room and board fee at an assisted living or your room and board fee in the hospital, and they can't pay for like 24-hour caregiving, and that's because it's coming out of the medical part of Medicare or your insurance, not like the room and board part. For someone who's dual certified, Medicare, Medicaid, their room and board, if they're in a Medicaid facility, would be paid for by Medicaid. And if they're above the income level where they are appropriate for Medicaid, then the room and board part has to be private pay. So who pays for all of this? Palliative care is paid for by third-party payers, by insurance companies, better than it was 10 years ago, not as well as we hope it will be. There's limited coverage by Medicare and insurance companies, but we're talking about maybe a visit every 1 to 2 months. The VA system does have their own palliative care, but it takes time. Think of palliative care like a specialty that you have to get a prior authorization for, and you have to say, Mother, may I, with the insurance company to get in there, so we can't get in like immediately. Hospice care is, if you're sick enough to be on hospice, it's like you won the Willy Wonka golden ticket, because if you call me, if a provider calls me right now and says, I have a patient who's doing really bad and I need you out there today, then I will make a phone call and we'll get out there and we'll get them today or tomorrow or the next day. But literally, if I have a provider who says, this person's not doing well, I need someone out there today, they will go out today. They will move the mountains to get out there today. Almost all insurance plans cover hospice. If it's Medicare, it goes under Medicare Part A, which everybody has, not Part B, which not everybody has. Most hospices, not just us, but most hospices take uninsured patients or unfunded patients on a case-by-case basis, but I've never known us to say no, and I think that's on most are, because we just want people to get the care they need. So I'm going to talk briefly about this, but this is in the handout, because I'm going to spend like 5 minutes on just some of the stuff that is a little bit of overlap with what she talked about before, and also is on the slides that you saw as you were coming in. They were very, very good, by the way. A little bit about the emotional effects of coping with serious illness and grief. The stage of Dr. Kubler-Ross talked about the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. When she first wrote her book, she was talking about people with a terminal illness, facing a terminal illness, but it really applies to grief just in general, I think. Especially those of us who might be caregivers or even healthcare workers. When you're dealing with a serious diagnosis, or your loved one is, or someone you assist is, anger and frustration are very common early on, along with those other stages. Why me? Why did this happen to me? This is not fair. Facing your own mortality and the prospect of death or of limits on your life is very, very overwhelming, especially if you're a baby boomer like me and you just assumed you would live forever and be able to ride a bike every day forever. There's a lot of denial that you can't do the things you used to be able to do. Much of grief happens before death, and that's true not just if you're the patient, but also if you're the caregiver. Much of grief happens before death, and that's why on our hospice and palliative care side of things, we try to get our grief counselors or our spiritual counselors in early on. Don't wait till the person dies. There's a lot of endless worry and fear about what the future holds, feeling hopeless and helpless, feeling isolated. At the very time in your life when you don't need to feel isolated, having a serious illness or a loved one with a serious illness is very, very isolating. And you lose your identity. You lose your identity to the disease. You become the disease. And you don't want to become the disease. You want to stay the person you are. In hospice and palliative care, we try very hard to keep our attention on who the person is. I had a patient in the nursing home, the first nursing home that I was a medical director of, that had dementia, and she was a lovely little lady, but she was very confused by the time I knew her. But she had lived a fabulous life, including a lot of travel. In her room, by her bedside table, there's a picture of her on a camel in front of the pyramid, in front of one of the great pyramids in Egypt. And every time I walked in that room, I had to see her on the camel in front of one of the great pyramids in Egypt. And I was reminded, this person is not this person in this bed who doesn't even know her son anymore, and certainly doesn't know who I am. She's the person in this picture. So I used to tell family members to bring pictures in. Bring the pictures in. For one thing, it helps give you something to talk to that person about when they're having a bad day, but also it helps their caregivers know it's not the person in the bed. This is who you're looking at. This lovely 30-year-old woman in her wedding dress. This is who this person is. Not this person in this bed who's grumpy because she doesn't want to take a bath today. I'll be grumpy when I'm 90 when they try to take me to the shower. Guaranteed. The effects on caregivers. The caregivers are going to go through a lot of the same emotional effects as the person with the illness, and they may experience on a different timeline. They may still be in a bargaining or depression phase when the other person has already moved on to acceptance or not. And you can go back and forth between the stages. The caregiver may be so overwhelmed by caring for the person that they forget to take care of themselves. And you talked a lot about this already, and you will continue to talk about this. And they may have that survivor guilt. They wish it had happened to them. This is very, very true with pediatric patients where the parents and the siblings will have survivor guilt. I wish this had happened to me. I wish I could bear the burden for them. Why not me? It should have been me. Siblings of pediatric patients very commonly have the survivor guilt. You have to really address that. Spouses and close family and friends may feel like the disease is the third wheel or the fifth wheel in the relationship, and you may have to set boundaries for, when we're in this room in this house, we're not going to talk about the disease, or when we're at the dinner table, we're not going to talk about the disease. This is our time, we're not talking about the disease. Other times are okay. It's okay to set boundaries and say, at this time, or in this place, or in this room, we're not going to talk about the disease. The caregivers may not be comfortable sharing their emotions or their stress with the affected person or with other people because of that guilt, like she was talking about earlier. They feel guilty that they're feeling sorry for themselves or that they're having these caregiver emotions. And then they have their own problems of their own that they have to deal with. One thing to bear in mind is that feelings are facts, whether you're the person with the disease or the caregiver. How you feel is how you feel, and your feelings are your feelings. One thing my husband's a retired eye surgeon, and he used to tell people to get off the roller coaster. When someone's dealing with a serious illness, you can watch the roller coaster, but don't get on it because there's going to be a lot of ups and downs. Don't ride the roller coaster if you're dizzy. You can watch it, but don't get too up and too down with every up and down with the disease process. Be careful who you look for information. She alluded to this. People are going to recommend all kinds of stuff to you. Spray your Teflon on. If you know that there's that loving church friend or neighbor or whoever that always wants to give you a lot of information, spray your Teflon on before you talk to them. Smile and nod. Thank you so much. Wow, that's great. Let it go. Let it roll right off. Stay connected, but as she talked about, getting isolated is one of the worst things for us. So stay connected, whether it's by phone, whether it's by video chat, and whether it's in person, whatever you have the energy for. Having to retell your story, whether you're the sick one or your loved one is a sick one, having to retell your story over and over and over and over again can be exhausting. So if you're just a friend or not the immediate caregiver, just be mindful that they may not want to tell a story, they may not want to talk about how they feel right now. It just brings it all up again. It's like ripping a Band-Aid off, so maybe ask them about something else. Support groups can be very helpful because they're specially trained and geared to helping people, especially as a support group for your specific disease process. If you don't find the right support group at first, look around. It's got to be a fit, just like a therapist or a counselor or even other medical providers. It's got to be that right personality fit, so it's okay to look around. Very strongly consider, especially if you're dealing with a very serious illness, very strongly consider mental health support. I have a therapist. I'm not ashamed of it. There's good reasons why I have a therapist. Very seriously consider mental health support. Most of us in healthcare need one because of the burden of what we carry. The caregivers need mental health support also. You may need to have the caregiver may need to have a mental health specialist, and the person with the disease may have to have one, and they may need couples counseling together because what happens to your relationship when you're dealing with a serious disease? Do all your relationship problems magically go away? No, they do not. They do not magically go away. When there's a person with a serious illness, and especially a terminal illness in the family, does all the family dysfunction magically go away? No, it does not. No, it does not. This is why mental health can be a big help. I'm going to skip that one and go to these last two. How to talk to someone with a serious illness. Let them know that you're available to listen. And this is where I repeat the stuff that she said, but at least that way you know it's really important. Let them know you're available to listen. Just your presence is the most important thing. It doesn't matter what you say. You can even say, I have no idea what to say to you, but I'm just here. Your presence is the most important thing. One of my kids, I raised my kids really well, and they're a lot wiser. I didn't. Somehow my kids got raised really well. I don't take the credit for it. Somehow my kids raised themselves really well. But my oldest, who's 34, the last time we had dinner with them, was saying something about, not directly related to me, and she was saying, well, the most important thing is just to be present for a friend. It doesn't matter what you say. The most important thing is just your presence. And I thought, whoa, you go. Where'd you learn that? But it's the truth. But isn't it? It's the truth. Just your presence is the most important thing. And it's okay to say, I have no idea what to say to you, but I just want you to know that I'm here and I care and I love you and I'm really sorry you're going through this. If it's appropriate to your relationship with this person, a gentle touch, a hug, if it's appropriate to a relationship, and not a lot of words may be the best thing. A card, a phone call, a text, just to let them know that you're thinking about them. And frequently, if I text someone, I'll say, you don't have to answer this, I just want you to know that I'm thinking about you, and I'll reach out to you when the dust settles or something like that. You know, let them know that they don't have to answer, because trying to figure out an answer is exhausting. And it's okay to talk about other things. Sometimes when someone asks me about a sick family member in my life right now, I just don't want to talk about it. I want to talk about something else. Ask them or share about positive things. Ask them about their grandkids. Ask them about something else that would spark a joy and not about the illness. Some don'ts. I don't like to say don'ts. It's sort of like Lent. I don't like to give up things for Lent. I like to acquire positive habits for Lent. But these are a few don'ts. Avoid telling someone that you know how they feel unless you really truly do know how they feel, because you probably really don't know how they feel. Avoid telling them about other family members or friends who got some great cure or treatment or whatever, because every person is like a snowflake, and every disease process, it's different in every person. Avoid unrealistic statements that might give false hope. We try to give hope in medicine, but not false hope, and we try to kind of reframe hope sometimes. Like, I know everything will be fine, or I know they'll find you a cure. Instead, say things like, I hope you get some answers that you're looking for soon. It sounds like you really need some. Avoid statements that might come off a little bit judgmental, like, try to stay positive and try not to be so negative. I don't know. I'm trying to think of some nice way that avoid things that might be judgmental or that might dismiss their feelings, because remember, their feelings are their facts. Some better options might be, I hope you find some peaceful moments. I hope you find time to do some things that bring you joy. I hope you get some answers that you're looking for. And don't take it personally if they don't want to talk. They may hurt that day. They may feel bad. They may not have slept the night before. When you go on medical visits, make a list of questions ahead of time. If it's a new provider, make sure they have your records ahead of time. It's best not to assume that the records will be sent, because they may not have been sent. Take a list of all your meds. When I was a resident 100 years ago, we used to make our patients bring their meds in a grocery bag. That's too complicated now, and people take too many supplements. But most of us have apps on our phones or some way to take a list of all the medicines, and that's everything. That's everything. The supplements, the herbals, everything. We want to know all of it, because it all matters. I don't care if you take herbals. I just want to know what you're taking. I just want to know all of it. Legal and otherwise. I want to know all of it. I'm not going to tell. I just want to know. If you have records of very important tests and procedures, seeing a new provider and you have records of very important tests and procedures, don't assume that they will have gotten to the office. I had this happen to me the other day. Don't assume they will have gotten to the office ahead of you, because they won't always. If it's really important, take it with you. Take someone with you if possible. When I was a resident, I was taught that people only hear about 10% of the information you give them in an office visit. I think it's probably a little bit better than 10%, but I don't remember everything I'm told. I don't remember everything I'm told in an office visit, and I do this for a living. Make notes, or if you want to listen and you're not a note taker, have your support person make notes. And it's okay to have a little elevator speech. If there's things that people need to know about you, like my elevator speech is, I'm Cynthia Pearman, I have white coat hypertension. Yes, I know, I'm a doctor, but I have white coat hypertension because going to the doctor makes me very nervous, and my blood pressure is going to be 160 over 80 when you take it. But if you wait till the end of the visit, when I calm down, it'll look a whole lot better, I promise. So these are my blood pressures at home, where it's 110 over 60 every day. Because I get very anxious going to the doctor. Why? I don't know, I just do. A little bit about advanced care planning that I won't spend a whole lot of time on. It's a roadmap for when you can't make your own medical decisions, and for who you want to help make your decision. It's more than just the code status. Do you want to be intubated? Do you want to be resuscitated? It's never too early to start discussing. My parents would never write it down. God love them, because they were depression-era people, and they didn't write stuff like that down, but they at least did talk to us about it, so that's something. It's never too early to start discussing. Thanksgiving is a great time. There's a difference in capacity and competence. You can still have capacity to make certain medical decisions when you no longer have the competence to make legal decisions. There's a difference, and your capacity to make medical decisions might depend on how big the decision is, and it might depend on the day. The wishes of the patient, the wishes of the power of attorney should generally not supersede the wishes of the that have previously been expressed by the patient. So, for instance, if we have a family member who says, well, they told me they never wanted a feeding tube, but I tell you what, once they can't make their decisions anymore, I'm telling you to put a feeding tube in. As medical providers, it happens, but we shouldn't do that. If the person has very clearly expressed to people what their wishes are, as a medical provider, I I'm really obligated to go by what that patient wants. That can get real dicey and end up in the ethics committee sometimes when the person has very clearly expressed their wishes and the power of attorney wants to supersede them. I don't like that. It's not nice. Most people want to have these conversations, and most of their family members want to have these conversations, but everybody's afraid of it. So Thanksgiving is a great time to bring it up. Thanksgiving. Doctors are afraid to have these conversations. There are a lot of good tools that are free or minimal cost online that you can do it with. They can help you have these discussions at home. A palliative care provider can help. There's a couple of really great videos that I know that they recommend, and I know that we recommend. The Conversation Project, and it's on my handout. Theconversationproject.org has some really great videos, and they recommend doing it like now, like Thanksgiving. And it doesn't have to be sad. If you look up those, look up some of these videos, and they're excellent. And there are some other resources that you can look on my microscopic handout that's hard to read, or she can email it to you, or you can copy it off the screen. Some of your resources for hospice and palliative care, get palliativecare.org. The NIH, the government, actually has some very good palliative care and hospice resources. There's another very good document online called the 5 Wishes Project that is a very nominal cost. It was free during COVID, during the worst part of COVID, but I think it's a nominal cost now. National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization has some good information. Another one called prepareforyourcare.org and the Conversation Project. And then these are some of my favorite books and resources. One called Hard Choices for Loving People that talks about when you're having to make hard decisions about things like feeding tubes and ventilators and CPR. It's a teeny tiny little book, very good book. A Beginner's Guide to the End, Courageous Conversations on Dying, The Conversation. My personal favorite that I have a signed copy of, Being Mortal, which is a quick read. I read it in one airplane ride and I immediately turned it around and read it again. Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, who's a very well-known surgeon who's written several other good books. And then Dr. Kubler-Ross's last book that she wrote on grief and grieving that after she died, before this book was finished, and the co-author helped finish it for her. And then a book that I just love that's very kind of therapeutic. It's sort of like that chicken soup for the soul, but a little bit higher level, called Kitchen Table Wisdom, Stories That Heal. And there's a lovely anniversary edition of it now. These are my favorite resources. You matter to the last minute of your life, and we will do all we can, not only to help you die peacefully, but to help you live until you die. Dame Cicely Saunders, the mother of the hospice revolution. Any questions?
That was amazing. So Dr. Pearman, last year when I spoke, I told the story of my friend Susie Stiles, who I know you also know. And she sat everyone down after Thanksgiving, was like, okay, we're just ripping off the Band-Aid, we're all gonna do this. And I said, I can't imagine the indigestion that ensued after that discussion, but she talked about how nice it was to have that all done. Dr. Pearman is with UT Hospice and Palliative Care, and Brian Hatmaker delivered those to me, and he has handouts in your red bags that give some of the same information and how to contact them too. So what questions do people have? And I will bring this around to folks.
My husband and I, at the lawyer's office, did living will. And it was real simple, and we had the discussion about the feeding tube, and I said, Frank, think about it. You are terminal. The feeding tube is going to make that terminal thing last longer, suffer longer. You don't want the feeding tube. And so, we did a couple of check marks and got it done. Well, I've got my husband in the Concord United Methodist Church program for 2 days a week. And then their form was just so much more detailed, and it had to have the doctor's signature. And Dr. Marlowe said, I want to talk to him first. Well, then and I told the people at Concord, I said, I don't want y'all making the decision. it sounds like this is information y'all need. Okay, we're not gonna give him CPR, but I said, I would rather wait until he got to the emergency room if there was something catastrophic that happened. And our decisions are, if there's no hope of getting out of the ditch, as you call it, then that's when I don't want all the CPR and the feeding tube and everything like that, because there's no hope, and for him to come back.
So can you talk to the post form and like why that's used? Can you give some more information?
I didn't get off in the ditch talking about the post form, because some of these side discussions can be a whole talk in themselves, but the post form is a portable form that is supposed to go with you. The same form is supposed to go with you everywhere you go, from wherever you live to the hospital to, you know, the day program to wherever. It's supposed to be portable. That's what the P is for. And it is supposed to deal with things that someone might need to know very immediately. I sort of wish the feeding tube wasn't on there, because there's so much more that goes into the feeding tube discussion. And there's nothing inherently wrong with feeding tubes. But that is a longer discussion, and it really is a case-by-case kind of situation. When the feeding tube discussion has come up because someone is at the end of the road with a terminal illness, whatever it is, whether it's dementia or whatever, when the feeding tube has come up because they're at the end of the road with that illness, and they're not getting out of this last ditch, not significantly, that's different from someone who has had a stroke,
Right.
and their swallow is impaired, but the therapists think they have a pretty good chance of getting better, or a surgery that they can't swallow right now, but once they complete, you know, these treatments, they may be able to swallow better. And there are even some illnesses where a well-timed feeding tube actually not only buys someone time, but better quality of time. ALS is one of those exceptions where ALS, a well-placed, well-timed feeding tube done at the right time, actually is a good thing for ALS patients until they get to the very end of the road. So I sort of don't even like that the feeding tube issues on the post form, yet it is. But the reason it is because that's something that most people, that is a very hard discussion to have. And there's so many other discussions that maybe take priority ahead of that when you're dealing with somebody with a dementia, especially. And it's a very long discussion to have, which is why I don't like it being on the post form. Too often those post forms are filled out by people who aren't really skilled in filling them out. And it really should be filled out by someone who knows the patient and knows what their values are. So lots of times when we have to fill out a post form for someone, we just kind of do that top part where it says the part that you need to know right away that they would need to know at the care facility, which is like, if they stop breathing or their heart stops beating, do you want them taken to the hospital or not? If they're taken to the hospital, do you want them to get CPR and get intubated and go to the ICU or not? Or do you want us just to keep them comfortable? When you get down to that other stuff, you've got time to talk about that. Nobody's going to put a feeding tube in. They better not. Nobody should put a feeding tube in without some very thoughtful discussion about goals. That's when you pull the palliative care consultants in, or somebody who can help you sort out some of those hard. The one slide where I said about the time for palliative care is when there's some hard decisions to be made. That's what I was talking about. So what I tell people to do on that post form sometimes with the feeding tube, or things like giving antibiotics, is to say, discuss with family on case-by-case basis. Because you can fill in, you can write in between the lines down there. So sometimes I'll write, discuss on case-by-case basis, which means just don't do anything about this till you talk to somebody first. And then we table it and we have a discussion about it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because to me, I've worked in a hospital in the genetics lab and everything, but I'm not a medical person in the sense that you are, and it's situational. Because,
absolutely, yeah.
And so, I want the experts to tell me what your thoughts are on recovery, and then let us talk, and we'll do it.
That's why I hate that it's on the post form. I would rather, and in that situation where, and if you're feeling as a family, and again, sometimes these things aren't a medical decision, as much as it is a decision about, you need the medical facts to know what their medical situation is and their likelihood of getting any improvement. But the decision making is what does this person want that fits within their value system and their goals, and if they can't answer for themselves, then you know their values and their goals better. What do you think they would want if they can't answer for themselves? We don't tell you whether this is the right thing to do with feeding tube. You tell us whether you think they would want it based on what's happening. So the feeding tube doesn't ever need to be answered right away. So that's why I let people cheat, and I say ask
In the margins.
Yeah, I write in the margins and I say, discuss on case by case, discuss with POA on case by case basis or something like that. And I do the same thing with antibiotics too sometimes. Sometimes they know, I don't want any of this, and that's okay. But sometimes it's like, well, I don't know, it depends. And that's okay, because for those things farther down the page, you got time to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's just the top part. Do you want to go to the ER or not? Do you want to have CPR? Do you want to be intubated? Do you want to go to the ICU or not? That's the stuff you got to know kind of more in a hurry. The other stuff can wait. It can wait. Right in the margins.
Other questions? I was talking to someone earlier about hospital settings and how to advocate within a hospital setting for yourself and your loved one, and those decision makings around ER versus going to the hospital floor versus going back home. In that immediacy of going to the emergency room, how do you access palliative quickly? Like, what are some words that caregivers should use for that?
Do you have a palliative care team on staff? What hours are they available? How can we get them? And typically, and it depends, if you're at a couple of the hospitals in the area, the emergency department physicians and providers are very attuned to and very open to it. They love that. If you're not at a facility that has palliative care available or that is more attuned to it, sometimes the way to do it is to talk to the nurse. Sometimes if I need something done in the office, I need to speak to Dr. So-and-so's nurse. I don't need to speak to him or her, I just need the nurse. That's who gets stuff done. Or like if you're at the cancer center, the nurse navigator. If you're on the floor at the hospital, ask the nurse. Anybody can initiate that. And I bring that up to say, if you talk to the emergency physician or nurse practitioner and say, I think we might need a palliative care specialist, do you have that available? And they kind of blow you off about it, ask the nurse. But keep asking, just keep asking. And the other thing, and that I have found very helpful and necessary, most of the bigger hospitals in there anyway have a patient advocate. And if you're having trouble and need someone to help you run interference, if you're having trouble communicating and being heard and getting needs met, call a patient advocate. Do not be afraid to call them. I've had to do it before. And they can help you with some of these things.
So I think it's also, like you said, about knowing how to advocate for yourself and your loved one. And one of the reasons Parish Health really wanted to put this on is to give you all language that you can use when you are in these situations with yourself, with your loved one. Lane and I were like whispering back and forth because there's even situations where you think about you being twice removed from something and it comes in handy to know this information. So thank you so much for being here.